Hey there, tonight we're diving into the forgotten Christmas traditions of the Middle Ages, where mistletoe wasn't for kissing, but for warding off witches. What you're about to discover might surprise even the jolliest of souls. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the grand bazaar of history, where people trade grains of truth for tales of grandeur, the medieval Christmas tradition known as the Feast of Fools stands as a wild testament to humanity's knack for chaos. Forget the gentle glow of Christmas lights and the cozy aroma of gingerbread. This was a time when the world turned upside down, giving peasants the chance to don the crown, if only for a day. It was the medieval equivalent of a world without Wi-Fi, sheer pandemonium. In the Middle Ages, Christmas wasn't just a day. It was an endurance test of festivity stretching from December 25 to January 6. And smack dab in the middle, like a rogue wave crashing through a holiday cruise, was the Feast of Fools. Held primarily on January 1, this event was the medieval version of let's see how far we can take this party before someone calls the constable. The Feast of Fools was about more than just letting the local baker wear a paper crown. It was an economic and social pressure valve, a way for the lower classes to blow off steam in a society built like a pyramid scheme. For one glorious day, the roles reversed. The high and mighty were marked, and the village jester could channel his inner Julius Caesar, minus the toga, but with all the theatrics. The origins of this topsy-turvy celebration are as murky as a medieval moat. Some say it harkens back to the Roman festival of Saturnalia, that ancient precursor to the office Christmas party, where slaves and masters swapped roles. In reality, it was probably a mishmash of pagan rituals and Christian customs, like a holiday fruitcake made of leftover bits from every culture that passed through Europe. Economically speaking, the Feast of Fools was a head-scratcher. In an era where a decent pair of shoes could set you back several pence, the budget for such festivities was the medieval equivalent of burning through your paycheck at a theme park. Records from the time, scarce as they are, suggest that towns would pool resources, like a medieval crowdfund, to pay for the revelry. Maybe they figured that after months of back-breaking work, a little financial lunacy was just what the doctor, or rather, the local apothecary, ordered. It was a time when the price of wine could spike during the festivities like a dot-com stock in the late 90s. According to some accounts, a barrel of Bordeaux might run a few shillings higher during the feast, a small fortune for most peasants. But who could resist? Wine was the social lubricant that made the whole charade run smoothly, or as smoothly as a cart with square wheels. Socially, the Feast of Fools was a mic drop moment, a chance for the overlooked to have their voices heard. Peasants, who usually counted their words as carefully as their coins, could let loose in front of the very people who dictated their daily grind. It was a day when the village idiot might be elected Lord of Misrule, a title as prestigious as it was ridiculous, which he would hold with the kind of authority usually reserved for popes and princes. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with this annual eruption of anarchy. The church often looked at the Feast of Fools like a parent at a teenager's first house party, equal parts disapproval and resignation. Clergy members were known to rail against the event from their pulpits, decrying it as a descent into madness. But spoiler alert, like many things in history, telling people not to do it only made them want to do it more. So why did the chaos reign year after year? Simple, because it worked. The Feast of Fools was a social release valve, a way for the common folk to let off steam without actually taking up arms. It was a medieval lesson in the importance of controlled chaos, a reminder that sometimes the best way to maintain order is to embrace a little disorder. And who could argue with results like that, especially when the alternative was pitchforks and torches? In the end, the Feast of Fools is a reminder that history is as much about the absurd and the chaotic as it is about the grand and the noble. It's a testament to the fact that even in the most rigid societies, there's always room for a little madness. And let's be honest, doesn't every holiday season need a little more foolery? And speaking of things that make the holiday season memorable, Ahem, chaotic. Let's dive into the medieval marvel that is the Yule log. Forget everything you know about the modern-day candle-scented, chocolate-filled version of this tradition. In the Middle Ages, the Yule log was less about cozy warmth and more akin to a medieval strongman competition, complete with the risk of losing a few fingers or toes. The Yule log was a piece de resistance of Christmas festivities, a massive tree trunk that was lugged into the great hall with much fanfare. And let's be honest, a fair bit of grumbling too. We're not talking about a quaint little log you toss into the fireplace, mind you. This was a beast of timber, often requiring a small army of serfs, or, for the more ambitious, a couple of oxen to haul it in. Imagine, if you will, an entire tree being dragged through the snow, leaving a trail of destruction that would make even a Viking proud. So why all the fuss? The Yule log was believed to hold magical properties. It was said to bring prosperity and protection, warding off evil spirits and ensuring a bountiful harvest. Think of it as the medieval version of a multi-purpose home appliance, with a bit of mystical insurance thrown in. But before you get too swept away by the romance of it all, consider the reality. The log had to be large enough to burn continuously throughout the 12 days of Christmas. Picture the logistical nightmare, and you'll understand why the phrase, burning the midnight oil, might have originated here, except it was more like burning the midnight tree. In true medieval fashion, the Yule log was not just a firewood extravaganza, it was a social event. The lighting of the log was a communal affair, with a family gathering that rivaled today's reality TV reunions, minus the cameras, but with just as much drama. Legend has it that the remnants of last year's log were used to ignite the new one, a symbolic passing of the torch that was as much about tradition as it was about practicality. After all, flint and tinder weren't exactly items you could pick up at the local market. But let's not romanticize the whole ordeal too much. In reality, the Yule log was a filthy, labor-intensive undertaking that left you with soot-covered clothes and an aching back. The great hall, with its high ceilings and drafty windows, wasn't exactly a snug alpine lodge. More often than not, the smoke from the log would fill the room, giving everyone a complimentary bout of medieval asthma. Ah yes, nothing says Merry Christmas like coughing up a lung. From an economic standpoint, the Yule log was a bit of a paradox. On one hand, it was a symbol of abundance, a demonstration that a household could afford to burn a whole tree for 12 days straight. On the other hand, it was a significant investment. Timber wasn't cheap, and the sheer size of the log meant that it had to be carefully selected and harvested, often from a family's own meager supply. The cost of time and labor to haul and prepare it was akin to throwing a lavish party on a shoestring budget, somehow making it work while silently praying you don't end up in the debtor's dungeon. Socially, the Yule log was a great unifier, a way for everyone from the lord of the manor to the lowliest serf to gather around the same hearth. It's a testament to the power of shared hardship. Nothing builds camaraderie quite like collectively cursing the oversized log that's threatening to break your back. For a brief moment, class distinctions blurred in the haze of smoke and firelight. But once the log was lit, and the initial excitement faded, reality set in. The lord would retire to his chambers, and the serfs would be left to stoke the flames and sweep up the ashes. In the grand tapestry of medieval Christmas traditions, the Yule log stands out as both a symbol of hope and a reminder of life's harsh realities. It's a perfect microcosm of the era itself, where magic and practicality lived side by side, where the promise of warmth came with the price of hard labor. So next time you light a decorative Yule log candle or nibble on a chocolate version, spare a thought for the medieval folks who braved the cold, the smoke, and the social hierarchy to celebrate their version of the season. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate the fact that your holiday traditions don't involve dragging a tree trunk through the snow. And speaking of medieval traditions that mixed magical thinking with a touch of the absurd, let's raise a mug to wassailing, the original excuse for a party masquerading as a harmless bit of caroling. Wassailing was like Christmas caroling's wilder, cider-loving cousin, always ready to break into song and help itself to your best booze. Forget the harmonious, angelic choirs you might envision. This was more of a raucous, cider-fueled rabble, part social gathering, part economic transaction, and part political maneuver. The term wassail comes from the Old Norse, ves heil, meaning be healthy. But in practice, it might as well have meant be merry and slightly inebriated, because that's how these gatherings typically unfolded. The tradition involved groups of wassailers, usually peasants or local villagers, going door to door singing, not just for the love of music, but with the expectation of receiving food, drink, or a few coins in return. It was the medieval equivalent of a pub crawl, but with more singing and fewer hangovers, thanks to the lower alcohol content of cider compared to today's potent brews. Let's talk numbers. A typical wassail bowl could hold several gallons of cider, ale, or whatever the household could spare. It was essentially a communal punch bowl filled with a concoction that was equal parts seasonal cheer and questionable hygiene. Remember, this was a time when personal cleanliness was more of a suggestion than a standard practice. The more generous the host, the more enthusiastic the wassailers would be in their singing, which could either be a blessing or a curse, depending on your tolerance for off-key renditions of medieval hits. Economically, wassailing was a bit of a balancing act. For the wassailers, it was a chance to supplement their meager winter provisions with the generosity of their neighbors. For the hosts, it was a public relations exercise, an opportunity to show off one's wealth and hospitality. Refusing to participate could result in being labeled a miser, a reputation no medieval landowner wanted. After all, in a world where your social standing could be as precarious as a one-legged stool, maintaining good relations with the locals was essential. Politically, wassailing had an edge of subversion. It was a chance for the lower classes to enter the homes of their social superiors, if only briefly, and demand a bit of the good life. In some regions, wassailing even took on a more confrontational tone. Groups would threaten mischief if their demands weren't met, a sort of medieval trick-or-treat, but with more emphasis on the trick if the treat wasn't forthcoming. It was a reminder that the line between order and chaos was as thin as the ice on a village pond. Despite the potential for discord, wassailing was generally seen as a positive force, a way to strengthen community bonds during the dark winter months. The songs themselves often contained blessings for the household, invoking prosperity and good fortune for the coming year. It was as if the wassailers were saying, "Fill our bowl, and we'll fill your year with luck." And who could resist such an offer, especially when made by a group of slightly tipsy neighbors? But let's not romanticize the musical aspect too much. The idea of a harmonious ensemble is largely a myth. In reality, wassailing could sound more like a cacophony than a choir. The combination of varying vocal skills, the effects of cider, and the enthusiasm of the performers meant that the melodies were often, shall we say, unique. Think of it as karaoke night, but with fewer power ballads and more rustic charm. The social dynamics of wassailing were as complex as a medieval tapestry. While it was largely a communal affair, it also reinforced existing hierarchies. The wassailers might get their fill of cider, but the hosts retained the power, deciding how much to give, and in doing so, demonstrating their status. It was a delicate dance of give and take, where generosity was both expected and respected. In the end, wassailing was a microcosm of medieval life itself, a blend of tradition, community, and a touch of rebellion, all served up in a bowl of cider. It was a reminder that in a world often dominated by rigid social structures, there was still room for a little spontaneity and festivity. So next time you hear a Christmas carol, remember the wassailers of old, who sang not just for joy, but for sustenance, camaraderie, and perhaps a little bit of mischief. And as we reflect on these age-old traditions, we're reminded that the past wasn't just a series of grand events and noble deeds. It was also about ordinary people finding extraordinary ways to cope with the challenges of life, whether through a song, a feast, or a burning log. So stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover about the forgotten Christmas traditions of the Middle Ages. Who knows what other surprises history has in store? And speaking of medieval traditions that mixed magical thinking with a touch of the absurd, it's time to roll out the red carpet, or perhaps the muddy village path, for mumming plays. Think of them as the Middle Ages version of guerrilla theatre, blending masks, mystery, and just enough bizarre antics to keep everyone guessing. If you're picturing spontaneous village fun with a happy-go-lucky troupe of jesters rolling into town, well, it's time for a reality check. Mumming was as much about logistics and economics as it was about entertainment. First off, Let's debunk the myth that mumming plays were the medieval equivalent of a flash mob. These weren't impromptu performances where villagers suddenly broke into song and dance. No, this was a well-planned affair, often involving months of preparation. Imagine coordinating a theatrical production without the perks of email chains or Google calendars. Instead, it was all about word of mouth and good old-fashioned persuasion to get everyone on board. Now, let's talk finances. Organizing a mumming play was no cheap endeavor. The costumes alone could cost several shillings, a small fortune when you consider that a skilled laborer might earn only a couple of pence a day. Masks were often made of leather or wood, requiring both craftsmanship and cash. And then there were the props. You couldn't just pop down to the medieval equivalent of a dollar store for a fake sword or a dragon's head. These were handcrafted, often by the performers themselves or local artisans. Each item was a mini investment, a testament to the dedication of these medieval thespians. And what about the logistics? This wasn't a simple matter of setting up a stage in the village square. Performances were often held in the great halls of local lords or even in the open air, requiring careful planning to ensure everyone got a good view. Audience members might travel several miles to catch a show, so the stakes were high. A disappointing performance could mean more than just bad reviews. It could lead to a village-wide grumble fest that would last until the next harvest. So, why did they go through all this trouble? Because mumming plays were more than just entertainment. They were a form of social commentary cleverly disguised as drama. Picture this: a play featuring a king and a fool, where the fool outsmarts the king, leaving the audience in stitches and the actors with a sly sense of satisfaction. It was a subtle way to critique the social order without ending up in the stocks. In a world where directly challenging authority could land you in hot water, or worse, a mumming play was the perfect outlet for veiled political discourse. If you're thinking, wow, medieval folks were pretty clever, you'd be right. These performances were layered with meaning, often using allegory and symbolism to comment on everything from local politics to the feudal system. A dragon might represent a particularly unpopular tax, while a damsel in distress could symbolize the plight of the common folk. The beauty of it all was that everyone got the message, but no one could point fingers directly at the performers. But let's not romanticize the whole affair too much. For all their cleverness, mumming plays were also a bit of a gamble. Not every audience appreciated the underlying messages, and a misplaced joke could turn the crowd against the performers faster than you can say "off with his head." Plus, there was always the risk of offending the local lord, who might not take kindly to being depicted as a buffoon, even if the portrayal was spot on. Economically, these plays were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they brought a welcome boost to local economies. Travelers needed food and lodging, and artisans had work crafting costumes and props. On the other hand, the cost of putting on a show could strain a village's resources, especially in lean times. It was a delicate balance, and one that required careful negotiation and a fair bit of trust among all involved. Socially, mumming plays were a great equalizer. They brought together people from all walks of life, if only for a few hours. For the duration of the play, class distinctions blurred. The lord of the manor might find himself sitting next to a farmer, both equally entranced by the spectacle before them. It was a rare moment of unity in a world often divided by rank and privilege. But once the curtain, or whatever served as one, fell, everyone went back to their usual roles. The performers would pack up their masks and props, ready to move on to the next village or return to their day jobs. For them, mumming was a labor of love, a chance to step out of their everyday lives and into a world of make-believe, if only for a short time. In the end, mumming plays were a testament to the power of creativity and community in the Middle Ages. They remind us that even in times of hardship, people have always found ways to express themselves, to challenge the status quo, and to come together in shared experience. So the next time you attend a play or watch a movie, think back to those medieval mummers, who, with little more than a mask and a story, managed to captivate and challenge their audiences. And as we ponder the mysteries of medieval theatre, let's keep the curtains drawn for the next act of our historical exploration. The medieval stage has more stories to tell, and who knows what other secrets are waiting in the wings. Stay tuned for more tales from the forgotten Christmas traditions of the Middle Ages. And speaking of the medieval stage, let's talk about Twelfth Night, the grand finale of the Christmas season. If the Yuletide festivities were a marathon, Twelfth Night was the moment everyone sprinted across the finish line and promptly dove into a pool of merriment. Forget the quiet contemplation of New Year's resolutions. This was about revelry, indulgence, and a final hurrah before normalcy resumed its dreary course. Twelfth Night, celebrated on January 5th or 6th, depending on who you asked, because why not have a little chronological ambiguity, was the medieval equivalent of a New Year's Eve bash and a Mardi Gras parade rolled into one. The centerpiece of the celebration was the Twelfth Night cake, a baked extravaganza that, much like a reality TV show, came with a twist. Hidden inside was a bean or a coin, and whoever found it in their slice was crowned the Lord of Misrule. This was a title that came with all the responsibilities of a modern celebrity. None whatsoever, except to entertain and occasionally embarrass oneself. But before you get too swept up in the romance of being a temporary lord, consider the reality. The cake ingredients alone could cost a small fortune. Sugar and spices were imported luxuries, equivalent to sprinkling saffron on your morning toast today. Medieval households would save up for this one night of extravagance, a bit like blowing your annual salary on a single night out. Economically, it was a gamble, one that many took willingly for the sake of tradition and a brief escape from the mundane. And speaking of economics, Twelfth Night was an important social equalizer, albeit a temporary one. It was a chance for everyone, from the lowest serf to the highest noble, to let down their proverbial hair and partake in festivities that often blurred class lines. For one night, the rigid social hierarchy was as malleable as the dough in that Twelfth Night cake, and while the Lord of Misrule might have been a peasant during the day, for the night he could command the festivities, making ridiculous proclamations with the authority of someone who actually knew what they were doing. From a social perspective, Twelfth Night was like a pressure release valve on the medieval boiler of society. It allowed people a space to unwind and let loose without fear of reprisal. In a world where stepping out of line could lead to serious consequences, this controlled chaos was a vital outlet. It was a reminder that even the most rigid systems benefit from a little disorder now and then, a medieval lesson in the art of not taking oneself too seriously. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous aspects. The morning after Twelfth Night, like any good party, was a sobering return to reality. The Lord of Misrule would wake up to find his brief reign over, and the mundane duties of medieval life would resume, often with a hangover as an unwelcome souvenir. The social dynamics that had been put on hold for the night snapped back with the harshness of a winter morning. The revelry of Twelfth Night was like a snow globe, beautiful and contained, but ultimately temporary. Over time, Twelfth Night has evolved, shedding some of its medieval chaos, but keeping the spirit of celebration alive in various forms. Today, it's often marked by a quiet dismantling of Christmas decorations or a simple gathering with friends. The Lord of Misrule has been replaced by party hosts, and the Twelfth Night cake has morphed into less elaborate desserts. But the essence remains, a nod to tradition, a celebration of community, and a reminder that sometimes life calls for a little frivolity. So, what do these forgotten customs tell us about medieval life? They reveal a world that was as complex and contradictory as our own, where people navigated the challenges of their era with creativity, resilience, and a surprising amount of humor. These traditions were more than just festive diversions. They were coping mechanisms in a time when life was often harsh and unpredictable. Economically, these traditions highlight the careful balancing act medieval people performed daily. They show how communities pooled resources, valued shared experiences, and understood the power of coming together, even if just for a fleeting moment of joy. And socially, these customs illustrate a universal truth, that in every age, people crave connection, laughter, and the chance to momentarily step outside the roles society assigns them. In conclusion, these medieval Christmas traditions, while forgotten by many today, offer timeless lessons. They remind us of the importance of community, the value of a good laugh, and the need for occasional indulgence. They teach us that history is not just about kings and battles, but also about the everyday lives and celebrations of ordinary people. And perhaps most importantly, they show us that even in the darkest of times, there is always room for a little light-hearted mischief. So as you pack away your holiday decorations, and brace yourself for the year ahead, take a page from the medieval playbook. Embrace a little chaos, indulge in some frivolity, and remember that even the most fleeting celebrations can leave a lasting impact. After all, history is nothing if not a collection of stories about people finding joy in the most unexpected places. You crack open an eye, and the first thing you notice is the rough linen cloth draped over your face, not quite the gentle Egyptian carton pillowcase of your dreams. Welcome to Tudor court, where comfort is as rare as a Henry Roman VIII diet book. The morning routine here kicks off not with a comforting cup of joe, but with a brisk slap of cold water to the face. Forget your high-tech showerhead with multiple settings. This is more like a slap from the Thames itself, and it's about as refreshing as a wet fish. Personal grooming in the 16th century is a bit of a misnomer. Instead of a private bathroom, you've got a bustling chamber full of bustling servants. And speaking of servants, you need them. A lot of them. Bathing is a group effort, as fetching water and heating it is no simple task. It's not unusual to find yourself surrounded by attendants when you bathe, if you bathe. You might fancy the idea of a fragrant bath with rose petals, but those are reserved for the aristocracy, and even then not as often as you'd think. Queen Elizabeth I, for one, was reputedly a fan of bathing once a month, whether she needed it or not. You, on the other hand, might have to make do with a quick rinse every now and then, given how water had to be laboriously lugged to your chamber. Soap, if you can call it that, is made from animal fat and lye. It's more likely to strip your skin than leave it feeling supple. Now, about those teeth. Forget toothpaste. You're working with a paste of ground cuttlefish bone and honey, if you're lucky, or maybe a twig dipped in a bit of vinegar. Dental hygiene isn't exactly a priority, which might explain why the Tudors were a bit more familiar with toothaches than we'd like to be. But enough about the nitty-gritty of personal hygiene. Let's talk about your outfit, because appearances are everything at court. The cost of dressing the part is astronomical. We're talking about a wardrobe that could sink a small kingdom's budget. A fine set of garments might run you the equivalent of a year's wages for a common laborer. Fabrics like silk and velvet are the haute couture of the day. The sumptuary laws dictate who wears what, so don't get any ideas about flaunting ermine or gold unless you have the right connections or title. Getting dressed isn't just a quick zip and button situation. It's an intricate process involving layers upon layers, often with the help of a servant or two. You've got your linen chemise, doublet, hose, and if you're of the fairer sex, a gown with a whopping great farthingale to hold out your skirts. These clothes are heavy, and the corsets can feel like they're squeezing the very life out of you. By now, you might be yearning for a deodorant stick. Sorry to break it to you, but the best you can do is a dab of essential oil, if you can afford it. The air is filled with the heady scent of rosemary and lavender, a valiant but often futile attempt to mask the less pleasant aromas of court life. As you start your day, you realize the romanticized visions of Tudor times, ball gowns and courtly love, are more myth than reality. Sure, there are banquets and dances, but there's also the very real challenge of keeping yourself presentable in a time where hygiene wasn't high on anyone's list. The glamour of court life is often overshadowed by the practicalities of surviving in a world where cleanliness is a luxury and appearances are everything. In this world, the saying, "clothes make the man," is more than just an adage. It's a survival strategy. So as you wriggle into your restrictive garb, you might start longing for the simple pleasure of modern loungewear. But there's no time for that now. There's a whole day of Tudor court intrigue to navigate, and you're just getting started. As you tug at your doublet, trying to avoid suffocation by fashion, your stomach grumbles, reminding you it's time to face the Tudor version of breakfast. Don't expect a leisurely brunch with artisanal spreads. You're in for a morning routine that's more grab and go than sit and savor. If you're lucky, breakfast consists of a hunk of bread and a mug of ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. Forget your oat milk latte. This was a time when ale was safer to drink than water, thanks to its bacteria-killing brew process. It might sound like a boozy start, but this weak ale is more about hydration than inebriation. Now, before you start romanticizing this as some quaint medieval morning, let's set the record straight. Breakfast wasn't even on the menu for many. The upper crust often skipped it entirely, saving their appetites for a heartier midday meal. It was the working class who needed those carbs and calories to power through manual labor. Meanwhile, the gentry preferred to keep breakfast a quick affair if they bothered with it at all. After all, why spoil the appetite for a lavish dinner that would show off their wealth and status? Speaking of dinner, let's talk logistics. Imagine feeding an entire court, sometimes numbering in the hundreds. Cost of keeping everyone fed was astronomical. Edward Roman IV household accounts show he spent nearly £10,000 annually on food alone, a sum that would rival the GDP of a small nation today. And those famed feasts, they were more about social spectacle than culinary delight, heavy on the pomp and light on the spice. The Tudor diet was defined by your social standing. If you were nobility, your plate might include meats like venison, pork and swan. Yes, swan, because nothing says, "I've made it," like a bird that doubles as a lawn ornament. These were washed down with wines imported from France, because why not flaunt a bit of continental flair? But don't let the opulence fool you. Spices were so costly that many dishes relied on copious amounts of salt to preserve and flavor meats. Your taste buds might just beg for mercy. Now, if you were a commoner, your menu was decidedly less glamorous. Bread made from barley or rye was your staple, supplemented by pottage, a sort of Tudor stew that could range from hearty to horrid, depending on what was available. Fresh vegetables were seasonal, and fruits were more likely to be found in a noble's orchard than on your table. You see, back then, the diet was less about food groups and more about survival. But let's not forget the elephant, or rather the peacock, in the room. Yes, that's right. Peacocks were sometimes served, feathers and all, as a centerpiece at feasts. It's a bit of myth versus reality here. Sure, they looked impressive, but they were more for show than sustenance. The real workhorses of the Tudor kitchen were livestock and grains, the backbone of any respectable meal. Speaking of the kitchen, it was a veritable hive of activity, with cooks, spit boys, and scullions all toiling away in the heat. The spit boy, often a young lad, had the inglorious task of turning the spit for hours on end, a job that was as tedious as it was necessary. And those grand banquets, they required days of preparation, a small army of kitchen staff, and enough firewood to deforest a small area, all for a meal that was as much about status as it was about sustenance. The truth is, the Tudor court was a place where food wasn't just about nourishment, it was a statement, a reflection of wealth and power. Every meal was a performance, every ingredient a line in the script of courtly life. But behind the scenes, it was a game of supply and demand, with seasons dictating what was on the table. No wonder there was no avocado toast. Avocados were centuries and oceans away from the Tudor palate. So, as you rush through your bread and ale breakfast, take a moment to appreciate the simple joy of a quick meal. Because in the Tudor court, every meal was a reminder of your place in the world, a stage where bread and ale were the opening act, and the feast was the main event. And with that, you're ready to face the day. There's intrigue waiting, and maybe even a scandal or two, because in the Tudor court, the real drama was always just around the corner. And now, with breakfast a distant memory, and your stomach still growling for something a bit more substantial, you step into the lion's den, also known as the Tudor court. This is where the real feast begins, not of food, but of power and influence. Forget the Game of Thrones. This is Game of Tudors, and you're about to see just how sharp those velvet-covered claws can be. First things first, the social hierarchy. Think of it as a human pyramid scheme where everyone's either scrambling to climb or desperately holding on. At the top, you've got the monarch. And let me tell you, being a Tudor monarch is like being the sun in a solar system of sycophants. Everything revolves around you, but one wrong move, and you're heading for a supernova. Below the king or queen are the nobles, the dukes, the earls, and all the titles that sound impressive until you realize they're often just glorified land managers. Each noble is surrounded by a retinue of lesser nobles, who in turn have their own entourages. It's a bit like Russian nesting dolls, but with more backstabbing. Now, don't let the fancy titles and elaborate clothing fool you. These folks are playing a high-stakes game where the losers don't just go broke, they lose their heads. Literally. The Tudor court was a place where you could go from the king's confidant to an inconvenient corpse faster than you can say, off with his head. Just ask Thomas Cromwell. One minute he's orchestrating Henry Roman VIII marriage to Anne of Cleves. The next he's getting a less-than-royal haircut courtesy of the executioner's axe. So why bother with all this intrigue? Well, power and wealth, of course. Holding a position at court wasn't just about being close to the king. It was about accessing the real currency of the day, land and influence. And speaking of currency, the economic implications of court positions were as staggering as the gowns themselves. For some perspective, a position as a gentleman of the Privy Chamber could net you £100 a year, a tidy sum when you consider that the average skilled labourer earned about £10. But here's the kicker. Maintaining your status cost a fortune. It was like being in a perpetual state of keeping up with the Tudors. See, the court was a theatre, and everyone was an actor. Your costume, a statement of your worth. Your performance, a constant demonstration of loyalty and wit, falls short, and you could find yourself ousted from the king's favour and the court itself. For many, this meant financial ruin. You might think of it as an early version of Keeping Up with the Joneses, but with the added thrill of potential execution. The truth is, the allure of court life was a double-edged sword. It promised glamour and influence, but it came at a steep price. The cost of status symbols, those silks and jewels, was astronomical. In fact, it's estimated that the Earl of Leicester spent over £50,000 on clothes and jewels to keep up appearances. That's enough to buy a fleet of ships back in the day. So, while the romantic vision of court life includes banquets and ballads, the reality was a relentless hustle to stay relevant and solvent. And then there were the power plays. Courtly intrigue wasn't just about who had the king's ear. It was about who could keep it. You had to navigate this world like a seasoned chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. Alliances were forged and broken with the same frequency as marriages, often for the same reasons. It was a world where trust was a rare commodity, and betrayal was a business strategy. Take the Boleyn family, for instance. Anne Boleyn's rise to queenhood was a masterclass in ambition, but her fall was a cautionary tale. Despite being the mother of the future Queen Elizabeth I, Anne's inability to produce a male heir led to her downfall. Her story is a reminder that in the Tudor court, your value was often measured by your ability to produce, not just heirs, but alliances and advantages. And let's not forget the economic backdrop to all this drama. The Tudor economy was a patchwork of agricultural and mercantile pursuits, with the wool trade being an absolute cash cow. It was the backbone of English wealth, and the source of many a noble's fortune. But economic stability was as fickle as the king's mood. Wars, plagues, and bad harvests could turn prosperity into poverty overnight. In this context, a position at court was a lifeline, a way to ensure your family's survival in an uncertain world. Yet, for all its cutthroat competitiveness, the court was also a place of intellectual ferment. The Renaissance was in full swing, bringing with it a torrent of new ideas, from art to science. The court was a melting pot of creativity and ambition, where poets rubbed shoulders with politicians and scientists debated with soldiers. The likes of Sir Thomas More and Sir Francis Bacon were products of this vibrant intellectual climate, proving that the pen could be as mighty as the sword, or the axe, as the case may be. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. For every Sir Thomas More, there were countless others whose stories ended in obscurity or tragedy. The court was a place of opportunity, yes, but it was also a place of peril. Navigating it required not just cunning but courage, and sometimes a bit of luck. It was a world where the stakes were as high as the ceilings of the great halls, and the fall from grace was as swift as a sword stroke. As you weave through this web of intrigue, you might find yourself longing for the simplicity of modern office politics. But fear not, there's more to explore in this world of velvet and vitriol. The day is still young, and the Tudor court has plenty more secrets to unveil. So, tighten your doublet, adjust your ruff, and prepare to delve deeper into the heart of this historical drama. The plot is thickening, and you won't want to miss what happens next. So, you're in the thick of it, navigating a Tudor court that's less a stately dance and more a chaotic marsh pit of ambition, intrigue, and, let's be real, outright paranoia. And if the political machinations don't knock you off your feet, the sheer sensory overload of the place just might. By afternoon, the court is a riot of colors and textures, like a Renaissance fair on steroids. But before you're too dazzled by the spectacle, let's peel back the layers, literally, and see what's really going on with all those elaborate fashions. First, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the elephant sewn into your clothes. Tudor fashion wasn't just about looking good, it was about looking expensive, and that often meant lugging around enough fabric to upholster a small carriage. Take Henry Roman VIII, for example. The man was a fashion icon in his own right, amassing a wardrobe that included over 2,000 pairs of gloves. Yes, gloves, and that's just the hands. The rest of his attire was equally extravagant, with doublets and hose made from the finest silks and velvets. It was the Renaissance equivalent of haute couture, with a price tag to match. Some outfits cost as much as a small manor. But it's not just the kings and queens who are flaunting their wealth through fashion. Nobility across the board was in on the act, each trying to outdo the other in a sartorial arms race. The result? Sumptuary laws. These were the government's attempt to rein in the sartorial splurging by dictating who could wear what. Fancy that fur-lined cloak but don't have a title. Forget it. Ermine was reserved for the elite, a literal badge of privilege that said, "I'm important, and I've got the wardrobe to prove it." Beneath the surface glamour, though, lay an entirely different story, one of discomfort, restriction, and even danger. Those opulent gowns and doublets might look dazzling, but they weigh a ton. The average ensemble could easily tip the scales at 40 pounds. That's like wearing a toddler, one who's not particularly keen on being carried. And if you think that's bad, try maneuvering through narrow castle corridors without knocking over a candelabra or two. Fashion was a literal drag, and the struggle was real. Then there's the corset, which was less about creating an hourglass figure and more about squashing your insides into submission. Imagine having your ribs squeezed so tight you can practically hear them creak. It's not just uncomfortable, it's downright hazardous to your health. But in a world where appearance was everything, comfort was the sacrificial lamb. Now, before you start romanticizing the past as one big historical runway show, remember this. The Tudors weren't just playing dress-up. Clothing was a strategic tool in the chess game of court politics. Fashion was a powerful political statement, a visual shorthand for alliances and loyalties. For instance, wearing the right colors could signal your allegiance to a particular faction. Red and white roses weren't just floral choices, but emblems of the houses of Lancaster and York, respectively. The wrong rose at the wrong time could land you in hot water, boiling, if the king was in a foul mood. Even the fabrics themselves were politically charged. English wool was a national treasure, the backbone of the economy, while silk was an exotic import, a nod to international trade and diplomacy. Speaking of trade, the cost of importing luxuries like silk and ermine was astronomical. We're talking prices that could rival today's high-end designer labels. A yard of silk could set you back the equivalent of $2,000 in modern currency. And yet, despite the expense, the demand never waned. It was a testament to the allure of luxury and the lengths people would go to maintain their status. Sumptuary laws or not, if you had the resources, or the cunning, you found a way to flaunt your wealth. And let's not forget the influence of foreign powers on Tudor fashion. Alliances with Spain, France, or even the far-off Ottoman Empire were often reflected in the cut and cloth of courtly attire. A French doublet or a Spanish farthingale wasn't just a fashion statement. It was an outward expression of political alliances, a way to show you were in tune with the latest continental trends. It's like today's influencers flaunting designer collabs, except with more lace and fewer hashtags. But perhaps the most telling aspect of Tudor fashion was its transience. Trends changed as quickly as political alliances. 1 minute, everyone was sporting slashed sleeves, a nod to the Swiss mercenaries' battle-won attire. The next, you couldn't walk 10 feet without tripping over a ruffled collar that could double as a serving platter. This rapid turnover wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was a reflection of the court's volatile atmosphere, where fortunes could change as swiftly as the seasons. In the end, Tudor fashion was a microcosm of the court itself, dazzling, dangerous, and deeply symbolic. It was a world where appearances weren't just deceiving, they were defining. Your wardrobe was a statement of your worth, a visual resume that could make or break your career. And as you navigated this labyrinth of lace and politics, you'd quickly learn that the only thing more precarious than keeping up with the latest trends was keeping your head. So, as you catch your breath amidst the swirl of silks and satins, remember, in the Tudor court, fashion was more than a frivolity. It was a vital part of the game, a game where style was the weapon and survival was the prize. As the day wears on, you might find yourself yearning for a simple hoodie and jeans. But for now, there's no escaping the allure and the peril of Tudor style. And with the court's intrigue still unfolding, there's plenty more drama to come. Stay tuned, because in this world the plot never stops thickening. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with the kind of dramatic flair only a Tudor court could envy, you find yourself at the end of a day that feels like it's lasted a lifetime. Exhaustion clings to you like the velvet doublet you've been sweating through, and the political tension in the air is so thick you could slice it with the ceremonial sword hanging in the great hall. It's time to wind down, or at least that's what you'd expect. But this is the Tudor court, where leisure is just another opportunity for spectacle and strategy. Evening entertainment in the Tudor era was a curious blend of art, politics, and the occasional bout of good old-fashioned flattery. The court has gathered in the great hall, a cavernous space that echoes with the whispered intrigues of the day. If you're imagining a serene night of quiet reflection, think again. This is where the real show begins, and it's not just the jesters who are performing. Let's talk theatre. The Tudors loved a good play, and not just for the entertainment. These performances were rife with political messages, serving as both propaganda and subtle commentary. Imagine watching a Shakespearean drama where every line could be a veiled reference to current court affairs. The bard himself was no stranger to the Tudor court, crafting plays that danced around political sensitivities with all the agility of a courtier dodging the axe. Take Richard Roman III, a play that paints the last Plantagenet king as a villainous hunchback, conveniently aligned with Tudor narratives that justified their reign. But theatre wasn't the only act in town. Music was the lifeblood of courtly entertainment, a constant presence that could elevate or deflate the mood of a gathering. The sounds of lutes, viols, and harpsichords filled the air, weaving a tapestry of melody that masked the machinations beneath. For the Tudors, music was more than a diversion. It was a tool of diplomacy and influence. A well-played madrigal could win favor, while a discordant note might sour a negotiation. And let's not forget the masque, a lavish blend of music, dance, and drama that was the Tudor equivalent of a Netflix original, complete with elaborate costumes and special effects. These spectacles didn't come cheap. A single mask could cost upwards of £1,000, enough to feed a peasant family for several years. But in a world where appearances were everything, such expenses were deemed necessary. Behind the scenes of these grand performances was an army of laborers and artists, crafting every detail with painstaking precision. The cost of a single court event could rival that of a small military campaign, and the logistics were nothing short of a modern-day festival. From the set builders to the seamstresses stitching intricate costumes, the labor behind the scenes was Herculean. It's estimated that Henry Roman VIII court employed over 200 musicians alone, not to mention the craftsmen, cooks, and countless others who worked tirelessly to maintain the illusion of effortless grandeur. The allure of these spectacles was undeniable. They provided a temporary escape from the relentless grind of court politics, a chance to forget, for a moment, the high-stakes drama of Tudor life. But as the music fades and the lights dim, you're left to ponder the real cost of such opulence. The Tudor court was a place of stark contrasts, where the glittering facade often masked a grim reality. For every jewel-encrusted gown, there were countless hands toiling in obscurity. For every sumptuous feast, there were fields stripped bare to feed the insatiable appetites of the elite. So why, despite the danger and the deceptions, does the Tudor court continue to captivate our imaginations? Perhaps it's the romance of a bygone era, with its larger-than-life figures and tales of passion and power. Or maybe it's the allure of a world where life was played out on a grand stage, every action imbued with significance. In truth, surviving a day here would be a feat worthy of legend, a testament to endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, the Tudor court was a microcosm of human ambition and folly, a place where the stakes were as high as the towers of Hampton Court Palace, and the falls as swift as the Thames. It was a world of contradictions, where beauty and brutality coexisted in a delicate balance. As you reflect on the day, you realize that the true allure of the Tudor court lies not in its opulence, but in its raw, unvarnished humanity. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experiences, woven together by the threads of ambition, desire, and survival. And so, as you retire to your chamber, finally free of that oppressive doublet, you ponder the day's events with a newfound appreciation for the comforts of modern life. The Tudor court may have been a place of danger and deceit, But it was also a crucible of creativity and innovation, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Surviving a day in this world was no small feat. It required cunning, courage, and a healthy dose of luck. Perhaps that's why we're still drawn to it today, because, in a world of uncertainty, the stories of those who dared to dance with danger remind us of our own capacity to endure. So, as you drift into sleep, let the echoes of history lull you into dreams of a world where every day was an adventure, and every moment a chance to make your mark. You've just been summoned to the Great Hall, the heart of medieval court life, where serious decisions about wars, alliances, and the best way to roast a swan are made. But you, dear medieval jester, are not here to weigh in on political strategy or culinary debates. Your job is to entertain, to bring a little levity to a life that, let's face it, often felt like a relentless grind of survival. Welcome to the world of the medieval jester, a role that's about as glamorous as a mud-splattered peasant's tunic and twice as precarious. Your job description, if one existed, would have roots stretching back to ancient Rome, where jesters, or fools, as they were lovingly called, were already cracking wise. Even then, humor was a tool to smooth over the rough edges of life. Rome's version of a jester, the scurra, was a street performer who combined wit with a touch of physical comedy, often at the expense of the wealthy elite. Fast forward to the medieval era in Europe, and you find yourself at the intersection of art and survival, where a misplaced joke could mean the difference between a hearty laugh from the king or a one-way ticket to the stocks. But how did jesters leap from the dusty streets of Rome to the polished floors of a medieval court? Thank the socio-economic chaos of the Middle Ages for that. During this time, life wasn't just hard. It was like living in an endless episode of Survivor, minus the cameras and prize money. With famine, disease, and war lurking like your least favorite in laws, people needed laughter like a knight needed armor. Enter the jester, a necessary distraction from the constant threat of doom, a role that evolved out of necessity as much as entertainment. Now, let's talk specifics. The jester's job wasn't just about flinging insults or juggling a few balls. It was a full-blown performance art, a blend of satire, music, and storytelling. You needed to be quick-witted, multi-talented, and just a bit fearless, because let's be honest, making fun of royalty was a dangerous gig. Yet, contrary to popular belief, jesters didn't have carte blanche to say whatever they wanted. Sure, some tales paint them as truth-tellers with a free pass to critique the court, but more often than not, they had to tread lightly. Monarchs weren't exactly known for their forgiving nature, and one too many sharp jabs could land you in hot water, or worse. But why were jesters such a hot commodity in the courts? Well, let's consider the times. The medieval period, stretching roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, was not known for its abundant creature comforts. With an average life expectancy of around 30 to 40 years, folks were keenly aware that life was short and mostly unpleasant. Plagues, wars, and the odd Viking raid kept everyone on their toes. So, humor became a rare and precious commodity, a way to cope with the grim realities of life. And while we're debunking myths, let's tackle the notion of the jester as a figure of unchecked freedom. The romantic image of the fool who could speak truth to power is more Shakespearean ideal than historical fact. In reality, jesters often walked a tightrope, balancing their comedic insights with the court's mood. Step too far out of line, and you'd find yourself not just out of a job, but potentially out of a head. Kings like Henry Roman VIII had a well-documented fondness for jesters, but even he wasn't above ordering a scolding, or worse, if they crossed the line. Jesters were also a reflection of the court's diversity, or lack thereof. While the courts were bustling with knights, nobles, and the occasional scheming advisor, the jester was often the only one who could bring a hint of the outside world into the insular bubble of the aristocracy. They weren't just comedians. They were observers, critics, and sometimes unwitting diplomats. Their performances could sway opinions, albeit subtly, and they had to be keenly aware of the political and social currents swirling around them. So, as you don your motley for another day of jesting, remember the duality of your role. You're both a beloved entertainer and a precariously perched outsider, walking the fine line between humor and hubris. The court might laugh today, but tomorrow, well, let's just say it's always wise to stay on your toes. Because in the medieval court, the only thing more dangerous than a bored king is a jester who's run out of jokes. But let's not be too dramatic. It's not all doom and gloom. Sure, your life as a medieval jester is as secure as a sandcastle in a tsunami, but there's an upside. You're the life of the party, literally. Your daily routine involves far more than just juggling and pratfalls. You're expected to be a jack-of-all-trades entertainer. From sunrise to sunset, you've got an itinerary that would make a modern stand-up comic schedule look like a walk in a medieval garden read. Patch of dirt with ambitions. Your morning likely starts with rehearsals, perfecting your act under the watchful eyes of the court's early risers. And if you think you can just breeze through with a few knock-knock jokes, think again. Your comedic repertoire needs to be as diverse as a medieval spice rack. You might start with a song, perhaps something that pokes fun at the latest royal scandal, assuming you're feeling particularly brave. Then there's the slapstick, which is less about wit and more about physical comedy. While not everyone can appreciate a well-crafted pun, who doesn't love a good pratfall? But let's not forget, your most daring feat might involve political commentary. If you're clever enough, you can critique the lords and ladies without losing your head. Take Roland the Farter, for instance. Yes, that was his actual stage name, and yes, it was descriptive. Roland had the unique job of ending his performances with a leap, a whistle, and a fart, which, apparently, was a big hit with King Henry Roman II. And while it might seem like a cushy gig, let's not ignore the obvious. Your livelihood depends on the gaseous whims of your digestive system. Talk about a high-pressure job. Now, one might think this gig pays handsomely, but let's burst that bubble right now. On average, a jester could expect to earn about 100 shillings a year, roughly equivalent to a skilled labourer's wage. And that's if you're lucky enough to serve a generous patron. In comparison, a knight might rake in 10 times that amount. So while you might earn applause, your purse is likely as light as your comedic touch. Living conditions for jesters weren't exactly 5-star either. You might get a room in the castle, but more often than not, it's a shared space with the other entertainers and staff, tucked away in some drafty corner. And forget about privacy. The walls, if they exist at all, are as thin as the king's patience. Meals. You're eating whatever's left after the nobles have had their fill, which, let's be honest, is probably better than what most peasants were scrounging up. But be wary of the leftovers. A jester's stomach is a delicate ecosystem, especially if you're slated for a performance involving bodily humour. And while we're on the subject of nobles, remember that their attention is as fickle as a medieval weather vane. One day, you're the toast of the court. The next, you're yesterday's news. Your success hinges on keeping the court entertained, and that's a challenge when your audience has seen it all. You've got to be constantly innovating, which in a world without Netflix or TikTok means coming up with new material faster than a plague spreads through a village. Let's not sugarcoat it. The pressure is relentless. The court is a crucible of power plays and alliances, and making a faux pas in your routine could have you packing, or worse. The whims of the court could change faster than a knight's horse at a jousting tournament. One ill-timed jest about the queen's hairstyle or the prince's latest military blunder, and you're suddenly persona non grata. Yet, for all the danger and drudgery, there's something undeniably appealing about being the jester. You're the one person in the court who can mark the mighty, albeit with care. You're the deflator of egos, the mirror to the monarchy's less-than-flattering side. And if you're very good, or very lucky, you might even influence decisions, albeit in the most roundabout of ways. Your humour, your observations, they have the power to subtly sway opinion, to make people see the world in a slightly different light, even if just for a moment. So, as you step onto the stage yet again, Martley clinging to you like a second skin, remember that your role, precarious as it is vital. You're not just a clown. You're a commentator, a critic, a cultural touchstone. Sure, you're living on the edge, but what's life without a little risk? After all, in the medieval court, the only thing more unpredictable than the king's temper is the jester's next joke. You're teetering on the edge of chaos and comedy, knowing full well that in a medieval court, your jokes are like arrows, sharp, pointed, and occasionally lethal if they land in the wrong place. This isn't just a game of laughs. It's high-stakes political theatre, where your quips must navigate the treacherous waters of royal favour and disdain. You're not merely a jester. You're a diplomat with bells on your hat. Let's dive into the political minefield that jesters had to tiptoe through, like a cat on a hot tin roof. At any royal feast or grand event, you were expected to not only entertain, but also to read the room with the finesse of a seasoned courtier. These weren't your average dinner parties. They were elaborate affairs, where alliances were forged and broken faster than you could say, "Pass the mead." For instance, at the infamous Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520, an event that saw the courts of England and France trying to out-glitter each other, jesters played a crucial role. Amid the displays of wealth and power, jesters like Will Somers, Henry Roman VIII favourite fool, were tasked with lightening the mood and smoothing over any diplomatic wrinkles with well-timed humour. But here's the kicker. Jesters had to possess a sixth sense for knowing when the mood was ripe for mockery and when silence was golden. You couldn't just waltz in with a zinger about the Queen's hairdo when the kingdom was on the brink of war. An ill-judged jest could turn a feast into a fiasco, and no one wants to be the fool responsible for a diplomatic disaster. Your job was to read the faces in the room. Were the nobles relaxed, or was their tension thicker than a bowl of medieval porridge? Now, why on earth would a jester have any influence in these high-stakes arenas? Let's not kid ourselves. Jesters weren't exactly pulling the strings behind the throne, but they did have a unique vantage point. Much like a medieval Twitter feed, you could insert yourself into the conversation subtly and shift the tone, even if you couldn't change the topic. Some jesters, like the aforementioned Will Somers, were known to have the king's ear, at least when the king was in a receptive mood. Somers, who served Henry Roman VIII for over 2 decades, was one of the few who could tease the notoriously volatile monarch without fear of losing his head. His secret, a keen understanding of when to push and when to pull back, and an uncanny ability to wrap his insights in a cloak of humor. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of jesters as trusted advisors. The idea that they whispered sage advice into the ears of kings is more likely a fanciful tale spun by later generations. Sure, there are anecdotes of jesters offering astute observations that might have influenced decisions, like the time Tribulate, a jester to Francis I of France, reportedly quipped that the king should hang them all and God will sort them out in response to a particularly tricky legal matter. But let's face it, these stories are likely exaggerated at best and pure fiction at worst. However, jesters did serve as an early form of public relations. By making light of serious situations, they helped to maintain the appearance of a controlled and confident court. During periods of political upheaval, a well-executed jest could be the difference between a court descending into chaos or keeping its composure. A jester's performance was a pressure valve, releasing the built-up tension in the room, if only for a moment. It was an art form, comedy as crowd control, if you will. And let's talk pressure. Imagine performing at a royal banquet while the kingdom teeters on the verge of war, knowing your every word is being weighed not just as entertainment, but as potential treason. It's a bit like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. One slip and you're toast. Jesters had to be political chameleons, shifting their tone and content to suit the ever-changing landscape of courtly life. They were the original spin doctors, using humor to gently steer conversations and perceptions, or at least to diffuse them temporarily. Yet, for all their perceived influence, jesters were still, at their core, entertainers. They were not knights or nobles. They had no land, no title, no say in the grand machinations of medieval politics. Their power, if any, was ephemeral, as fleeting as laughter itself. A jester's influence was often like smoke, visible but intangible, and easily dispersed by the winds of change. They were only as relevant as their last successful jest. The romanticized image of the jester as a truth-teller, a sage in motley clothing, is indeed alluring. Who wouldn't want to believe that the court's clown was a secret mastermind, wielding influence with a well-placed pun? But the reality was far less glamorous. Jesters were there to entertain first and foremost, and any political sway they held was more incidental than intentional. It was the rare jester who managed to balance both roles, entertainer and influencer, without losing their head, literally or figuratively. So, as you sit backstage, waiting for your cue, remember that you're more than just a performer. You're an integral part of the court's machinery, a cog in the wheel that keeps the kingdom turning. The stakes are high, the risks even higher, but the rewards, those rare moments when your humor lands just right, when you see the king's eyes twinkle with genuine mirth, make it all worthwhile. Just remember to keep your wits about you, for in this world, A jester's success is as fleeting as the laughter they inspire. As you wait for the king's laughter to echo through the grand hall, let's pivot to the real nitty-gritty of your life as a medieval jester, your place in the social hierarchy. Spoiler alert, it's as complicated as untangling a knight's chainmail after a long day of jousting. You're the court's entertainer, sure, but your social standing is as clear as a murky medieval moat. Let's start with the basics. In the grand pyramid of medieval society, you're somewhere around the middle, possibly wedged between a particularly ambitious peasant and the castle's resident stable boy. You're not a noble, obviously, but unlike the majority of the kingdom's population, you've got a rare backstage pass to the court's inner workings. That's nothing to scoff at. You eat where the nobles eat, albeit from the leftovers pile, and sleep in the castle, even if it's in the draftiest corner possible. Here's where it gets interesting. You have no land, no title, and no real power, but you've got something many envy, a voice. Not just any voice, but one that can echo in the halls of power, even if only as a whisper. Your jokes and jibes, when carefully crafted, can poke holes in the inflated egos of the elite. Yet, you're always in a precarious position, much like a medieval balancing act, where one misstep could send you tumbling down the social ladder faster than you can say, "off with his head." Now, let's talk about your unique duality as both an insider and outsider. You're privy to courtly secrets, yet you're not truly of the court. It's a bit like being invited to a fancy party, but only allowed to watch from the kitchen. You're there, but not quite there. This outsider status allows you to observe the court with a critical eye, to see the absurdities others might miss. It's no wonder that jesters were some of the keenest observers of human nature. They had to be, if only to survive the whims of their capricious patrons. But don't get too comfortable with your insider status. Step outside the castle walls, and you're just another bloke in Martley. The townsfolk might laugh at your antics, but they won't mistake you for one of the noble elite. In a time when social mobility was about as common as a dragon siding, a jester's life was a curious anomaly. You could rub elbows with royalty one moment and be shooed away by a busy merchant the next. It's this constant dance between worlds that defined your existence. Speaking of dancing, let's not forget how humor played into all this. In medieval times, humor was a social lubricant, smoothing over the rough edges of feudal life and providing a rare moment of relief. But humor was also a social divider. The jokes that flew in court might not land as well in the local tavern, and vice versa. Your comedy had to be as adaptable as a knight's armor, fitting the occasion and the audience perfectly. A jest about the king's weight might earn you a chuckle at court, but try that quip in the village square, and you might find yourself dodging rotten tomatoes. This brings us to the perception of jesters in broader society. While court jesters were a staple in royal households, they were viewed with a mix of admiration and suspicion by those outside the castle gates. To the average peasant, a jester was a figure of fascination, an entertainer who lived among the rich and powerful, yet who still belonged to the common folk, in a way. But let's not romanticize it too much. Jesters were also seen as oddities, people who didn't quite fit into the rigid class structure of the time. They were a reminder that in a world ruled by lineage and land, wit and humor could carve out a niche, however narrow. Yet, for all the allure of being the court's funny man, it was no comedic romp. The life of a jester was fraught with the constant pressure to perform, to innovate, and to stay relevant in a world that could turn on you in the blink of an eye. Your status was as precarious as a tightrope walker's, and one false move could see you plummeting back to obscurity, or worse. It wasn't just about making people laugh. It was about surviving the court's shifting tides and maintaining your place in its complex social ecosystem. In a way, jesters were the original social commentators, using humor not just to entertain, but to reflect on the society around them. They held a mirror up to the court, and by extension, to the world, showing both its beauty and its flaws. And while the court might have laughed at their antics, there was often an uncomfortable truth hidden beneath the jester's martley, a reminder that even the most powerful are not immune to the absurdities of life. So, as you prepare for another performance, remember that your role is more than just making people laugh. You're a bridge between worlds, a teller of truths wrapped in humor, and a survivor in a world that is as unpredictable as it is unforgiving. The court may be your stage, but your audience is the world, and your comedy, when done right, has the power to transcend the boundaries of class and culture. But don't get too comfortable in your role. After all, in the capricious world of medieval courts, the only constant is change, and a jester must always be ready to adapt, to evolve, and to entertain. And speaking of adapting and evolving, let's fast forward a few centuries to see how the jester's antics have managed to stick around in our modern consciousness. It's a bit like finding out that disco is still alive and well in some corners of the world, unexpected, yet somehow inevitable. The jester, with their timeless knack for poking fun at authority and holding up a mirror to society, has become an enduring symbol in our cultural toolkit. But why does this courtly comedian from a bygone era still resonate today? For starters, the jester's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of humor. In a world where the news can often feel like a medieval struggle of its own, a good laugh remains a universal balm. The jester, with their sharp wit and fearless commentary, serves as a reminder that sometimes the best way to cope with the absurdity of life is to laugh at it. This has translated into the modern-day comedian, the satirist, and even the late-night talk show host, each carrying the torch of the fool's legacy, albeit with a few more Twitter followers and a lot less motley. In literature and media, the jester archetype has been romanticized, often depicted as the wise fool who sees through the pretenses of society. Think of Shakespeare's clowns, who, despite their foolish exteriors, often deliver the most poignant truths. The jester lives on in these narratives as a figure who, despite being marginalized, holds a unique power, one that comes from seeing the world as it truly is and daring to speak that truth, however uncomfortable. This romantic image, while not entirely accurate, has a certain allure. After all, who wouldn't want to believe in the story of the underdog who uses humor as both shield and sword? Yet, let's not get carried away on the wings of romanticism. The life of a jester was far from the carefree romp that some stories would have us believe. As we've seen, a jester's existence was precarious, with their fortunes tied to the volatile whims of their patrons. The idea of the jester as a truth-telling sage is more fiction than fact, a convenient narrative that has grown legs over time. In reality, jesters were more likely to be entertainers first, and any insights they offered were carefully veiled in jest. It's a bit like imagining a modern comedian as a political advisor. Sure, it makes for a great story, but it's not exactly the full picture. So, what can we learn from the jester's place in history and their continued relevance today? For one, it underscores the human need for humor as a coping mechanism. In times of crisis, whether it's a medieval plague or a modern-day mishap, laughter can be a lifeline. The jester's role, both in the past and in its modern incarnations, reminds us that humor is not just a diversion, but a vital tool for navigating the complexities of life. It's the safety valve that prevents the pressure from building up to a breaking point. Moreover, the jester's ability to speak truth to power, even if only through humor, highlights the importance of dissent and critique in any society. The fool's jests, while often couched in comedy, served as a subtle form of resistance, a way to challenge the status quo without openly rebelling against it. In today's world, where freedom of expression is both a right and a privilege, the spirit of the jester encourages us to question, to critique, and to laugh at the absurdities that surround us. In wrapping up our journey through the motley world of medieval jesters, let's dispel a final myth, the notion that jesters were universally loved and revered. While some did indeed win the favor of kings and queens, others were cast aside as soon as their humor fell flat. They were, in many ways, the original victims of cancel culture, subject to the fickle tastes of their audience. Their legacy, however, is not defined by their failures, but by their ability to endure. The jester's true triumph lies in their resilience, their ability to adapt, to entertain, and to reveal the truth, all while walking a tightrope between comedy and catastrophe. So, next time you find yourself chuckling at a clever joke or a satirical skit, remember the jesters of old, who paved the way with their wit and wisdom. They remind us that while life may be a serious affair, a little laughter can go a long way. In a world full of kings and chaos, sometimes the jester is the one holding all the cards. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the greatest jest of all. In the bustling, vibrant world of ancient China, Women were quietly engaging in a beauty routine that today would make a modern dermatologist break out in a cold sweat. Sure, we all want to look our best, but the women of ancient times were playing a hazardous game of roulette with their health. Why? Because beauty standards have never been risk-free, and back then, a porcelain complexion was literally achieved with, you guessed it, lead. Yes, lead. The same stuff that's now banned from paints and pencils because it's toxic. But in ancient China, lead-based cosmetics were the secret weapon in a woman's beauty arsenal. You see, pale skin was all the rage. It was a status symbol, a way to flaunt that you didn't have to toil under the harsh sun like a commoner. It was also a sign of youth and vitality, ironically achieved with something that slowly poisoned you. If that's not commitment to the beauty cause, I don't know what is. So, why did they willingly smear this deadly substance on their faces? Well, much like today's beauty influencers who swear by the latest miracle cream, ancient Chinese women were influenced by societal pressures and economic factors. Being fair-skinned was not just about personal pride, but also about social and economic advancement. The paler you were, the more attractive you seemed in the marriage market, which was crucial for securing a prosperous future. It's the ancient version of marrying rich by having the right shade of foundation. But cosmetics were just one part of the beauty puzzle. Hair care was another arena where women went to great lengths, literally. Rice water was the shampoo du jour. It wasn't simply a matter of cleanliness. It was about achieving that lustrous sheen, the kind that would make a shampoo commercial director weep with joy. The process was as peculiar as it was resourceful. Women would ferment rice water, a process that sounds like something out of a hipster foodie's cookbook. This concoction supposedly strengthened hair and made it shine, though one has to wonder about the smell. Surely, it was more eau de sushi than Chanel No. 5. Now, let's put these practices into perspective. In the grand scheme of ancient Chinese society, these beauty routines weren't just about vanity. They were deeply rooted in the socio-economic fabric of the time. A woman's appearance could dictate her social mobility, and in some cases, her family's financial future. The stakes were high, and the cost was often their health. It's a harsh reality that peeks through the romanticized image of graceful, delicate ladies in silk robes and ornate hairpins. It's easy to chuckle or cringe at these ancient practices from our modern viewpoint, but consider the pressure cooker environment these women lived in. The quest for beauty was a precarious tightrope walk between societal approval and personal risk. Much like today, where the beauty industry is worth a staggering $511 billion globally, ancient beauty wasn't just about looking good. It was big business. And like any profitable market, it thrived on creating needs and selling solutions, even if those solutions came in the form of toxic powders and questionable hair tonics. These practices also shed light on the broader economic and social dynamics of the time. In a society where the family unit was paramount, women were often the linchpin. Their beauty was not just personal, but a family investment. This placed an immense burden on women, who had to navigate these treacherous waters carefully. Even today, the echoes of these ancient practices can be seen in the relentless pursuit of beauty standards that defy logic and sometimes sanity. The desire to fit into a certain mold, to achieve an ideal that's often unattainable, is a tale as old as time itself. While modern cosmetics have thankfully ditched the lead, the lengths to which people go to meet societal expectations remain eerily similar. As we peel back the layers of ancient Chinese beauty routines, we find a story that is as much about aspiration as it is about adversity. It's a reminder that beauty, in any era, comes with its own set of challenges and sacrifices. So, the next time you complain about the price of a new moisturizer or the time it takes to style your hair, spare a thought for the women of ancient China who risked everything for a touch of elegance. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring, and often dangerous, pursuit of beauty. While ancient Chinese women were risking life and limb for the sake of that ethereal glow, they were also dealing with another kind of beauty beast, dental care. Yes, folks, welcome to the world of ancient oral hygiene, where your toothbrush might have once been a cow's best friend. Forget about toothpaste with whitening strips or sonic toothbrushes that could double as a space probe. These women were cleaning their teeth with twigs and bones. Think of it as the paleo diet for your gums, though without the Instagram filter to make it look appealing. Let's chew on this for a moment. In a time when dental plans were as mythical as dragons, women relied on what nature, and perhaps a bit of creativity, could offer. The go-to tool for keeping those pearly whites, well, not so pearly, was the humble twig. Chewing sticks, often from aromatic trees like the Salvadora persica, were the dental floss of the day. These sticks would be chewed until they frayed, creating a natural brush. Talk about innovation. It's like Mother Nature's own DIY dental kit. But if twigs weren't doing the trick, some women turned to animal bones. Yes, those skeletal remains from last night's dinner might just end up being tomorrow's toothbrush. It's enough to make you appreciate your electric toothbrush, isn't it? And while this might sound like something straight out of a Flintstones episode, there was method to the madness. These tools were surprisingly effective at removing food particles and massaging gums, though not exactly what you'd call minty fresh. Now, let's not sugarcoat it, literally. The diet of ancient Chinese women did them no favors in the dental department. A staple of grains, rice, and vegetables might seem healthy, but it was also a recipe for tooth decay. The carbohydrates broke down into sugars, feeding bacteria that would eventually lead to cavities and gum disease. If you're wincing at the thought, you're not alone. These women didn't have the luxury of dental fillings or fluoride treatments to save their smiles. Yet, despite the odds stacked against them, there's a myth that ancient Chinese people had flawless, gleaming teeth. Picture a jade dragon with a perfect smile. That's the fantasy, not the reality. The truth is, while some individuals might have had decent dental health thanks to genetics or regional diet variations, many suffered the consequences of inadequate oral care. Archaeological findings reveal that tooth decay and periodontal disease were common, much like regrettable bangs in the 1990s. So, why does the myth of perfect ancient teeth persist? It's partly because our modern lens tends to romanticize the past. We imagine these ancient beauties with flawless skin and perfect teeth gliding around imperial courts. But the reality was much grittier. Dental issues were a common part of life, much like the annoyances of modern dental visits, minus the soothing elevator music. What's fascinating, though, is how these simple, seemingly crude practices laid the groundwork for modern dental care. The frayed twig is the ancestor of today's toothbrush, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of necessity. It's a reminder that even our ancestors weren't strangers to the trials of maintaining appearances, albeit with a lot less fluoride. The importance of dental health wasn't just cosmetic, either. It had real implications for overall health, impacting nutrition and longevity. In a society where every member of the family had a role to play, being healthy wasn't just a personal matter. It was a collective concern. A toothache could mean being unable to help with daily tasks, affecting the entire household's well-being. And let's not forget, this was a time when societal standing often hinged on appearances. Just as fair skin was coveted, a complete set of teeth was desirable. It was a sign of youth and vitality, qualities that were highly valued in a culture that revered family lineage and continuity. In that sense, keeping one's teeth in good condition was as much about survival as it was about societal acceptance. In the end, the journey into the world of ancient dental care is a stark reminder of the lengths to which people have gone to meet the standards of their time. It's a story that underscores the universal human desire to belong, to be accepted, and to thrive in a world where appearances often dictate opportunities. As we continue to unravel these historical threads, it becomes clear that the pursuit of beauty, whether through skin, hair, or teeth, has always been a reflection of broader societal values and economic realities. So, next time you're brushing your teeth with that high-tech gadget, spare a thought for the women of ancient China, armed with nothing more than twigs and determination. Their legacy is a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity, a story that continues to resonate across generations. And as we smile at the thought of their ingenuity, we're reminded that history is as much about the mundane as it is about the monumental. And speaking of ingenuity, let's nosedive into the aromatic world of odor control in ancient China. Imagine living in an era where there was no such thing as a quick shower. That's right, folks. The ancient Chinese weren't exactly spoiled for choice when it came to body wash or deodorant sticks. Instead, they embarked on a fragrant journey of incense and scented sachets, a testament to human resourcefulness and the timeless quest to smell like anything but a sweaty human. So, what did they do when Mother Nature turned up the heat? Enter the sachet. a small, often embroidered bag filled with aromatic herbs and spices. These little charmers were the ancient equivalent of those pine tree air fresheners you see hanging from car mirrors, but a bit more sophisticated. Women would tuck them into their sleeves or belts, letting their fragrant contents waft gently around them, masking any unfortunate odors that might dare to make an appearance. It was both a practical solution and a status symbol, as the quality and rarity of the ingredients often reflected one's social standing. Now, let's break down what went into these sachets. We're talking about ingredients like musk and sandalwood, materials that even today have a reputation for being more expensive than your average bar of soap. These exotic scents didn't just pop up at the local market. They were traded along the Silk Road, a sprawling network connecting China to the rest of the world. This wasn't just a matter of smelling nice. It was a way to flaunt your wealth and worldly connections, like wearing a designer label or sporting the latest tech gadget. But the scented sachet wasn't the only trick up their sleeves, literally. There was also the strategic use of incense. Homes, particularly in the more affluent circles, were often filled with the smouldering scent of incense sticks, transforming living spaces into fragrant sanctuaries. The practice wasn't just about personal hygiene. It was deeply entwined with cultural and spiritual beliefs. Incense was thought to purify the air, ward off evil spirits, and even promote a sense of well-being. It was the ancient Chinese version of aromatherapy, but with a spiritual twist that would make today's wellness gurus nod in approval. Of course, this fragrant lifestyle was not accessible to everyone. Just as today you might balk at the price of a premium perfume, in ancient times, the finest incense and sachet ingredients were the preserve of the elite. Common folk had to get creative, relying on locally available herbs and spices. This economic divide was a clear reminder that personal hygiene was as much about status as it was about cleanliness. It was a fragrant facade that covered not just body odor, but also the social and economic divides of the time. But it wasn't all about smelling divine for the sake of it. There was a political angle to consider, too. Court life in ancient China was a pressure cooker of power plays and alliances. For women, particularly those vying for the emperor's favor, the stakes were high. Smelling pleasant wasn't just a personal preference. It was part of the competitive arsenal in the imperial harem. A woman's scent could make her memorable, a subtle yet potent tool in the complex dance of court politics. In such an environment, every advantage counted, and a well-timed waft of exotic fragrance could be the difference between obscurity and influence. Let's face it, though, for all the allure of these practices, there's a certain harsh truth to confront. The romantic notion of women wafting through corridors in a cloud of floral scent belies a reality that was often dictated by practicality and necessity. The emphasis on fragrance wasn't just about masking body odor. It was about navigating a world where appearances could dictate one's fate. In a society where a woman's social mobility was largely tied to her appearance and perception, smelling good wasn't a luxury. It was a strategic move in a high-stakes game. So, while we might chuckle at the notion of carrying around a bag of herbs to stay fresh, it's worth appreciating the lengths to which people have always gone to conform to societal norms. Whether it's ancient sachets or modern deodorants, the underlying motivations remain surprisingly similar. It's a dance as old as civilization itself, where the scent of success is often just a sachet away. The journey into the world of ancient Chinese hygiene reveals a tapestry woven with threads of practicality, status, and survival. It's a reminder that history isn't just about grand battles and epic tales. It's also about the everyday rituals that defined people's lives. As we continue unraveling these aromatic threads, the story remains open, much like a sachet waiting to reveal its next layer of fragrance. Stay tuned, because the olfactory adventure is far from over, and there's much more to uncover in the aromatic corridors of ancient China. As we waft through the aromatic corridors of ancient China, let's turn our attention to a less fragrant but equally fascinating topic: feminine hygiene. Yep, we're diving into a subject that, while not typically discussed over tea, is essential for understanding the lives of ancient Chinese women. It's a tale woven from silk, plant fibers, and societal norms that would make even the most seasoned historian raise an eyebrow. Let's talk about silk, more than just the fabric of emperors and high fashion. For women in ancient China, Silk was a versatile material, not just for flaunting status or crafting delicate robes. It was also cleverly repurposed as a rudimentary sanitary product. Picture this: strips of silk, soft yet sturdy, serving as makeshift sanitary pads. Talk about a multitasker. But hold that applause. This wasn't the norm for everyone. Silk was a luxury, after all, and not every woman had a silk stash at her disposal. Enter plant fibers, the more proletarian option, offering a natural yet less glamorous alternative. You see, hygiene practices in ancient China were as much about class as they were about cleanliness. For the wealthy, silk was within reach, making their monthly routines a tad more comfortable. Meanwhile, women from less affluent backgrounds had to rely on plant fibers, which were functional, but not exactly the plush experience of silk. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, hygiene was a reflection of one's socio-economic status. The luxury of comfort and convenience was, unsurprisingly, not a universal privilege. But why the fuss about silk and plant fibers? The answer lies in the intricate web of Confucian beliefs that dictated much of societal life. Confucianism, with its emphasis on order, hierarchy, and propriety, had a big say in everything from family dynamics to personal hygiene. Women's health and bodies were often shrouded in taboos, with menstruation considered something to be discreetly managed and never discussed openly. In a society where modesty was highly prized, women were expected to handle their hygiene needs quietly and unobtrusively. Talk about pressure. This silence around feminine hygiene wasn't just about decorum. It had real consequences for women's health. With limited knowledge and resources, many women faced health issues that could have been mitigated with better understanding and care. The societal constraints imposed by Confucian norms meant that women often suffered in silence, unable to seek help or discuss their concerns openly. The irony, a philosophy that aimed to bring harmony and order, sometimes left women in a state of quiet chaos, struggling with issues that were as much about health as they were about societal expectations. Yet, despite these challenges, women found ways to adapt and innovate. The use of herbal remedies and natural materials wasn't just about necessity. It was also a testament to human ingenuity. Women learned to navigate their world with the resources at hand, crafting solutions that were practical, if not always perfect. It's a story of resilience, echoing the broader narrative of human history where necessity often sparks innovation. Now, let's debunk a myth that's as stubborn as a stain on a silk robe. The idea that ancient practices were universally primitive. While it's true that some methods were rudimentary by today's standards, they were remarkably effective given the context. The ingenuity of crafting sanitary products from available materials shows a level of resourcefulness that deserves recognition, not ridicule. But why does this matter? Because understanding these practices gives us insight into the broader socio-economic landscape of ancient China. It highlights the disparities between classes and the impact of cultural beliefs on daily life. It's not just about hygiene, it's about survival, status, and the silent strength of women navigating a world that often overlooked their needs. As we unthread the silk and plant fibers of history, we find a story that is as much about endurance as it is about elegance. It's a reminder that behind the romanticized images of graceful women in flowing robes lies a reality that was often complex and challenging. The legacy of these women is a testament to the universal human spirit, a story that continues to unfold, one woven thread at a time. So, next time you're marveling at the luxurious sheen of silk or the strength of natural fibers, spare a thought for the women of ancient China who turned these materials into more than just garments. Their resourcefulness in the face of societal constraints is a powerful reminder of the ingenuity that has always been a hallmark of human history. And as we continue our journey through the annals of time, let's keep peeling back the layers to reveal the stories that are waiting to be told. There's much more to uncover as we weave our way through the intriguing tapestry of ancient Chinese life. Stay tuned, because the journey is just getting started, and the threads of history are far from unraveling. Speaking of weaving our way through history, let's take a step back and see how these ancient threads have been rewoven into the fabric of modern life. If you think about it, the evolution of hygiene practices is like a giant game of cultural telephone, where each era adds its own twist to the message. In ancient China, beauty and hygiene were as much about socio-economic status and cultural expectations as they were about personal care. Fast forward to today, and while the tools and materials have changed, the underlying pressures persist. The quest for beauty remains relentless, a testament to human nature's enduring desire to fit into society's ever-shifting ideals. Consider the beauty industry today, worth a staggering $511 billion globally. That's more than the GDP of some countries. And yet, for all the advancements in technology and science, we still find ourselves chasing ideals that often defy logic. Take, for instance, the never-ending pursuit of flawless skin. In ancient China, the price for that porcelain complexion was lead-based makeup. Today, while we've thankfully ditched the lead, the lengths people go to for perfect skin can still be extreme. From laser treatments to injectables, the beauty market thrives on selling solutions to problems it often creates. It's a cycle as old as time, where the promise of perfection is just one product away. But let's not just focus on the superficial. Hygiene practices, too, have come a long way. No longer are we chewing on twigs or using animal bones to clean our teeth. Instead, we have electric toothbrushes that could probably double as small power tools. Yet, despite these advancements, the myth of the perfect smile persists, fueled by modern media and advertising. It's a myth that has its roots in ancient times, where teeth were a symbol of youth and vitality. Today, the pressure to maintain a gleaming set of pearly whites is as much about status as it is about health. The more things change, the more they stay the same. In reflecting on this evolution, it's crucial to recognize the economic and social forces at play. In ancient China, the luxury of silk for feminine hygiene or exotic incense for keeping odors at bay was a privilege of the wealthy. Today, the divide remains, albeit in different forms. High-end skincare products or premium cosmetic treatments are often financially out of reach for many. It's a stark reminder that while society may progress, the economic barriers to personal care and hygiene can still create significant divides. Let's also not forget the role of cultural ideals. In ancient times, Confucian beliefs shaped the way women approached personal hygiene. Today, the influence may come from different sources: social media, celebrity culture, global beauty standards, but the impact remains profound. The pressure to conform to societal norms can be overwhelming, leading people to make choices that aren't always in their best interest, health-wise or financially. It's a dance between cultural ideals and practical realities, where the stakes can be as high as they were centuries ago. And then there's the matter of debunking myths. We often romanticize the past, imagining it as a time of elegance and grace, conveniently forgetting the gritty realities. Similarly, modern beauty and hygiene narratives can be equally misleading. The idea that anyone can achieve the ideal look with the right products is a myth perpetuated by industries that profit from insecurity. In truth, beauty and hygiene are deeply personal and subjective, shaped by individual circumstances, cultural backgrounds, and economic realities. As we wrap up this exploration, let's take a moment to appreciate the resilience and ingenuity of those who came before us. The women of ancient China navigated a world that was often unforgiving, using the resources available to them in ways that were both practical and innovative. Their legacy is a powerful reminder of the human spirit's ability to adapt and thrive, even in the face of societal constraints. In the end, the story of hygiene and beauty is as much about survival as it is about aesthetics. It's a reflection of the broader societal values and economic conditions that have shaped human history. So, the next time you reach for that moisturizer or brush your teeth with your high-tech gadget, remember the journey from ancient times to now. It's a story of evolution, adaptation, and the enduring complexities of societal expectations, one that continues to unfold with each generation. And as we close this chapter on the past, let's look to the future, acknowledging that the pursuit of beauty and hygiene will always be a reflection of who we are as a society. It's a dance between the past and present, where the steps may change, but the rhythm remains timeless. So, here's to those who dared to dream of a different kind of beauty, a beauty that's as much about authenticity as it is about aspiration. Because in the end, the most compelling stories of history aren't just about the grand gestures or monumental events. They're about the everyday lives of people striving to make their mark, one small, often unnoticed step at a time. In the bustling markets of 16th century Europe, you might have overheard a conversation that went something like this. "Hey, did you hear about the guy trying to turn lead into gold? Yeah, he's still at it." Welcome to the Renaissance, where alchemy was as much a part of the cultural tapestry as art and science. But for all its mystique, being an alchemist back then was less Harry Potter and more Breaking Bad, except with fewer meth labs and more exploding cauldrons. Let's dive into the murky origins of alchemy during this era. It's a tale that starts way before Leonardo da Vinci doodled his flying machines. We're tracing roots back to ancient Egypt and China, where the idea of transforming base metals into noble ones caught on like wildfire. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and it was the philosopher's stone that stole the show. This legendary elixir promised eternal life and endless wealth, making it the medieval Powerball jackpot everyone wanted to win. Spoiler alert, it was about as real as a unicorn. Enter Paracelsus, a name that sounds like a spell, but belongs to a Swiss physician who was a big deal in the alchemical world. Paracelsus, born Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus van Hohenheim, try fitting that on a business card, was a revolutionary thinker. He declared that the true purpose of alchemy was to heal the sick, not just to make bling. This was a noble sentiment, yet he was often seen as a bit of a quack by his peers, who were more interested in turning their dusty labs into gilded palaces. Now, why was alchemy so alluring in the Renaissance? Well, imagine you're a struggling noble trying to impress your peers, or a monarch with a war to fund. Turning lead into gold sounds like a pretty sweet deal, right? The economic pressures were real. Europe was a patchwork of warring states, and money was the lifeblood of power. Alchemists, therefore, promised a shortcut to wealth, a quick fix to financial woes. Of course, this was easier said than done. You'd have better luck finding a leprechaun with a part of gold at the end of a rainbow. Speaking of economic pressures, let's talk numbers. The cost of setting up an alchemical lab wasn't cheap. You needed flasks, furnaces, exotic ingredients, and a healthy stock of patience. We're talking about an investment of hundreds of ducats, serious cash back then. And with no guarantee of success, it was a gamble that made Las Vegas look like a piggy bank. But here's the kicker. Alchemy wasn't just about gold. Sure, that was the headline act, but it was also about understanding the mysteries of the universe. Alchemists were the original mad scientists, blending mysticism with proto-chemistry in a cocktail that was as intoxicating as it was confusing. They believed that by unlocking the secrets of material transformation, they could also unlock the secrets of the soul. Kind of like trying to get ripped abs and enlightenment at the same time. Ambitious, if nothing else. Yet, for all its lofty goals, alchemy was often misunderstood. In a time when science and superstition often shared the same bed, alchemists were viewed with suspicion. Were they wizards, con artists, or genuine seekers of knowledge? The lines were blurry, and the stakes were high. If you failed to deliver gold, you might find yourself accused of fraud, or worse, witchcraft. And that's not a charge you wanted to face in a time when burning at the stake was considered a reasonable form of public entertainment. So, what kept alchemists going in the face of such odds? Perhaps it was the allure of the unknown, the promise of discovery, or simply the thrill of the chase. Whatever the reason, the quest for the philosopher's stone was a journey that defined a generation of thinkers, dreamers, and let's be honest, a fair share of charlatans. In the end, alchemy in the Renaissance was much like the era itself, a blend of the sublime and the ridiculous, the profound and the absurd. It was a time when the impossible seemed possible, where lead could become gold, or at least where people believed it could. And that's the real magic, isn't it? The power of belief, even in the face of insurmountable odds. But as history would show, sometimes the greatest transformations happen not in the lab, but in the mind. The allure of the philosopher's stone wasn't just a fascination. It was a full-blown obsession that gripped the Renaissance like a viral TikTok challenge. But let's pump the brakes on the romanticism and talk about the grind. A grind so grueling that even the most dedicated Starbucks barista would have thrown in the towel. Alchemists were the original hustlers, trying to make magic happen with the Renaissance equivalent of a shoestring budget. First off, let's talk materials. Mercury and sulfur were basically the peanut butter and jelly of alchemical concoctions, but these weren't exactly aisle 3 buys at your local Renaissance supermarket. Mercury, that shiny, slippery liquid metal, was a staple in the alchemist's pantry, but it came with a price tag that could make a nobleman weep, around 60 ducats per flask. That's some serious cheddar for a substance that was as likely to poison you as it was to turn lead into gold. Sulfur was a bit more forgiving on the purse strings, but when you're buying it by the sack and mixing it with everything else under the sun, the costs added up faster than a bar tab at a medieval banquet. And speaking of costs, let's not forget the infrastructure. Setting up an alchemical lab was no small feat. You needed a furnace that could rival a dragon's breath. Those things could hit temperatures up to 500 degrees Celsius. Then there were the glassware, the crucibles, the scales. It was a sharping list long enough to make Santa's workshop look understaffed. All this for the chance, just the chance, of hitting alchemical pay dirt. It was like buying a lottery ticket where the odds were stacked not just against you, but against the very laws of nature. Now, you might wonder why anyone would go through such a financial ringer for a pipe dream. Well, consider the societal pressure. Alchemists weren't just nerdy loners in the basement. They were part of the intellectual elite, the thinkers and tinkerers who were supposed to crack the secrets of the universe. That meant kings, bishops, and dukes were often their patrons, and nobody wants to disappoint someone with a crown and a penchant for beheading. If you failed, you weren't just a poor scientist. You were a poor scientist who might end up in the stocks, or worse. And let's not gloss over the witchcraft angle. Society back then was a cauldron of fear and suspicion. If your experiments produced nothing but smoke and frustration, you were at risk of being labeled a sorcerer, or, heaven forbid, a heretic. In a world where the Inquisition was less of a Monty Python sketch and more of a grim reality, being accused of witchcraft was as good as a death sentence. Alchemists walked a fine line between genius and lunacy, and one misstep could land them in a cell rather than a laboratory. For all their efforts, many alchemists found themselves living more like paupers than princes. There's a delicious irony in seeking the secret of eternal wealth while scraping by on the Renaissance equivalent of ramen noodles. They were the original dreamers, chasing a vision of prosperity that was as elusive as it was enchanting. And yet, despite the odds, the failures, and the ever-looming spectre of societal persecution, they persisted. Because sometimes, even when the world seems determined to beat you down, the dream itself is worth the struggle. Alchemists may have been chasing dreams on a diet of wishful thinking and wild ambition, but let's not forget the glittering mirage they were pursuing. The philosopher's stone was the Renaissance equivalent of viral fame, promising to transform not just metals, but fortunes. Yet, much like today's get-rich-quick schemes, the reality was far grimmer than the fantasy. Take, for example, the case of King Rudolph Roman II of Bohemia, whose court was a revolving door for alchemists claiming they could alchemize his silver into gold. Spoiler, they didn't. Unless, of course, gold is a euphemism for empty coffers. Rudolph was not alone in his alchemical obsession. His contemporary, King James VI of Scotland, later James I of England, also dipped his royal toes into the alchemical waters. James, the same guy who penned treatises against witchcraft, was ironically captivated by the mystical allure of alchemy. In his pursuit of the philosopher's stone, he hosted several alchemists, whose results were as disappointing as a soggy biscuit. You could say these kings were chasing the Renaissance equivalent of NFTs before they were cool and equally profitable. But why were these rulers so easily swayed by the siren call of alchemy? Well, the economic pressures of the time made the idea of creating wealth from nothing incredibly tempting. Europe was a hotbed of conflict, with wars as frequent as Tinder dates. Funding these campaigns required deep pockets, and the idea of manufacturing gold was the ultimate financial hack. Yet, like a mirage on the horizon, the promise was always just out of reach, leaving monarchs with little more than lighter wallets and heavier sighs. Now, it's easy to dismiss these rulers as gullible, but let's face it, alchemy was the original clickbait. The promise of turning lead into gold was an irresistible headline, and even the most skeptical minds were inclined to click read more. This is where the myth meets the messy reality. While the philosopher's stone was never found, the relentless pursuit of it led to something surprisingly valuable, the foundation of modern chemistry. As alchemists mixed, heated, and distilled their way through countless experiments, they inadvertently laid the groundwork for scientific methods that would later revolutionize the way we understand the natural world. Take, for instance, the work of Robert Boyle, who is often hailed as the father of modern chemistry. Boyle's fascination with alchemy led him to conduct experiments that debunked long-held myths, such as the four-element theory of earth, water, air, and fire. His rigorous approach to experimentation and his insistence on empirical evidence helped to shift alchemy from mystical mumbo-jumbo to a systematic science. Boyle's legacy is a testament to how even the most misguided pursuits can yield unexpected treasures. Another notable figure was Hennig Brand, a German alchemist who, while searching for the philosopher's stone, accidentally discovered phosphorus. In 1669, Brand boiled down gallons of urine. Yes, you heard that right, in a bid to extract gold. Instead of gold, he ended up with a glowing substance that could spontaneously combust. While it wasn't the eternal wealth he sought, Brand's discovery of phosphorus was a significant milestone in the history of chemistry, proving that sometimes, even when you're looking for magic, you find science instead. Alchemy's contributions to the scientific world were not limited to individual discoveries. The processes and principles developed by alchemists, like distillation, calcination, and sublimation, became the building blocks of chemical experimentation. These techniques, honed over centuries of trial and error, were crucial in transforming chemistry from a mystical art into a bona fide scientific discipline. So, while alchemists may have been misguided in their pursuit of the philosopher's stone, they inadvertently forged the tools that would eventually unlock the secrets of the elements. But let's not get too carried away with the warm fuzzes of scientific progress. Alchemy's journey from mysticism to science was anything but a straight line. The Renaissance was rife with charlatans who exploited the allure of alchemy for personal gain. These snake oil salesmen peddled elixirs and powders with grandiose promises, and often the only thing they transformed was their customers' expectations, from hopeful to hoodwinked. The line between genuine alchemical inquiry and outright deceit was as blurry as an out-of-focus selfie. In a world where magic and science were often indistinguishable, distinguishing the true seekers of knowledge from the con artists was no easy task. Yet, despite the swindlers and skeptics, the allure of alchemy persisted, fueled by a potent mix of hope, desperation, and the tantalizing promise of the unknown. Even when faced with repeated failures, many alchemists clung to their beliefs, convinced that the next experiment might finally crack the code of creation. This unwavering dedication to what seemed like an impossible dream is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for resilience and imagination. Alchemists were pioneers in a world without maps, driven by a vision of transformation that, while ultimately unattainable, inspired generations of thinkers to push the boundaries of what was known. Their legacy is a reminder that sometimes the journey is as valuable as the destination, even if that destination is a pot of gold that never quite materializes. As we look back on the alchemists of the Renaissance, it's clear that their story is a complex tapestry of ambition, folly, and unexpected triumphs. They were visionaries and dreamers, charlatans and scholars, united by a shared belief in the power of transformation. And while their quest for the philosopher's stone may have ended in failure, their contributions to the world of science continue to resonate. So here's to the alchemists, the original mad scientists who dared to dream of turning lead into gold, and in doing so, laid the foundation for a future they could scarcely have imagined. Stay tuned, because the story of alchemy isn't over yet. We've got more myths to debunk and more realities to reveal. While the alchemists of the Renaissance were busy stirring their cauldrons and dreaming of gold, a whole world of political and religious intrigue was bubbling away behind the scenes. Let's dive into this swampy soup where the church, secret societies, and political machinations all played their part, often turning the alchemist's life into a game of medieval chess, with a side of fire and brimstone. First up, let's talk about the church. The Catholic Church was like the Renaissance-era internet, omnipresent and not afraid to cancel you if you stepped out of line. Their stance on alchemy was a mixed bag, to say the least. On one hand, any whiff of magic or sorcery was a one-way ticket to Heresyville. On the other hand, the church was also interested in the same ultimate truths that alchemists sought. After all, if they could turn metal into gold, maybe they could point the way to spiritual enlightenment too. But let's not get carried away with the come-bear moments, If your spiritual journey veered too close to witchcraft, the Inquisition would be knocking on your door faster than a Jehovah's Witness on a Sunday morning. Enter the secret societies. You couldn't swing a cat in Renaissance Europe without hitting a shadowy cabal, and alchemists were often tangled up with these clandestine groups. The Rosicrucians, for example, were a mystical society that believed in the transformative power of alchemy, not just for metals, but for the human soul. They were the original conspiracy theorists, blending Christian mysticism with Hermetic philosophy. Their secretive nature and lofty goals made them both intriguing and dangerous, a bit like a Renaissance Illuminati, minus the catchy theme music. For alchemists, navigating these treacherous waters meant mastering the art of discretion. They often worked in the shadows, adopting coded language and symbols to communicate their findings and avoid the prying eyes of the authorities. Many alchemists were polymaths, dabbling in everything from astrology to medicine, which made them valuable advisors to the powerful patrons who could protect them from the church's wrath. But let's not pretend this was a walk in the park. Alchemists had to be as politically savvy as they were scientifically curious. One wrong move, and you might find yourself on the wrong side of a dungeon door. Take John Dee, for instance. Dee was an English alchemist, mathematician, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. He played a double game, working as a spy under the codename 007. Yes, James Bond fans, you heard that right. Dee used his alchemical knowledge to impress foreign courts while gathering intelligence for the English crown. This kind of high-stakes balancing act was as dangerous as it was necessary. If you could keep your head, it was a lucrative gig. If not, well, let's just say you wouldn't be around to regret it. Alchemy's role in Renaissance science and philosophy is where things really get interesting. While modern eyes might dismiss alchemy as nothing more than pseudoscience, it actually played a pivotal role in the era's intellectual landscape. Alchemists were the original interdisciplinary researchers, blending science, philosophy, and mysticism in a way that seems downright avant-garde today. Their quest to understand the fundamental nature of matter was a precursor to the scientific method, laying the groundwork for future breakthroughs in chemistry and physics. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, alchemy's reputation as a pseudoscience. Sure, the philosopher's stone was a bit of a wild goose chase, but the methods alchemists developed to pursue it were anything but. They meticulously documented their experiments, observed reactions, and hypothesized outcomes. Sound familiar? That's because it's the backbone of modern scientific inquiry. The alchemical approach to experimentation, though wrapped in layers of mysticism and metaphor, was a crucial stepping stone to the systematic study of the natural world. And let's not forget the philosophical dimension. Alchemy wasn't just about transmuting metals, it was about transforming the self. The process of purification and refinement was a metaphor for personal and spiritual growth. Alchemists believed that by understanding and manipulating the material world, they could achieve enlightenment and perfection. It's a concept that resonates even today in a world obsessed with self-improvement and the pursuit of higher meaning. In the collision of science, politics, and religion, alchemy found itself at a unique crossroads. It was both a path to self-discovery and a tool of statecraft, a subject of both scorn and fascination. Alchemists walked a tightrope between the tangible and the intangible, the known and the unknown. Their work was a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, no matter how elusive the goal. So while the philosopher's stone may have remained a dream, the legacy of alchemy is all too real, a reminder of the power of belief, the thrill of discovery, and the eternal dance between myth and reality. As we reach the tail end of this alchemical journey, remember there's still more to uncover. We've only just scratched the surface of how these proto-scientists influenced their world, and ultimately ours. Stay tuned as we delve further into the labyrinthine world of Renaissance alchemy, where the quest for gold was only the beginning. So, as we unravel the tangled threads of Renaissance alchemy, it's time to face its lingering legacy head-on, a legacy that's all glitz, glam, and a dash of sulphurous stench. Let's kick things off with a nod to those proto-chemists who, often branded as charlatans, laid the groundwork for modern chemistry. It's like discovering that your kooky uncle's tales about unicorns led to the discovery of the horse. First, let's appreciate the alchemical contribution to chemistry, a discipline that's now a bit more periodic table and a bit less eye of newt. The meticulous documentation practices of alchemists, those endless notes scribbled in code and obscure symbols, were the ancestors of the scientific method. Take Robert Boyle again, whose work in the 17th century debunked the ancient Greek idea of the four elements. By focusing on experimentation and observation, he transformed alchemy's mystical kitchen lab into a bona fide science. His 1661 book, *The Skeptical Chimist*, challenged the Aristotelian view and laid down the law. Chemistry was here to stay, and it wasn't about to take any of alchemy's mystical nonsense. Now, let's talk pharmacology. Alchemists weren't just the medieval version of get-rich-quick schemers. They were also the original pharmacists, mixing and mashing their way into the world of medicine. Paracelsus, with a name as grand as his ideas, argued that alchemy's true purpose was medicinal. His belief that disease was not a punishment from God, but a chemical imbalance in the body, was revolutionary. By treating illnesses with minerals and metals, zinc tablets, he set the stage for modern pharmacology. While he might not have turned lead into gold, he was certainly trying to turn sickness into health, which is arguably more valuable. The alchemical legacy doesn't stop at science. It seeps into the very fabric of our culture, like a persistent dye that refuses to wash out. Literature and pop culture have long been captivated by the mystique of alchemy, from Mary Shelley's *, Frankenstein *, to J.K. Rowling's *, Harry Potter * series. The idea of transformation and the quest for forbidden knowledge continue to enchant us. Alchemy's ability to straddle the line between science and magic makes it the perfect metaphor for the human condition, our eternal struggle to understand and control the world around us. And who can ignore the allure of the philosopher's stone, that mythical object of ultimate power and wisdom? It's become the MacGuffin in countless stories, a symbol of humanity's quest for immortality and perfection. But let's not forget, the philosopher's stone was about as real as a dragon's lair filled with gold coins. The magic was in the pursuit, not the prize, a sentiment that resonates with anyone who's ever chased a dream only to find the journey itself was the true reward. The cultural footprint of alchemy is as undeniable as it is fascinating. Even today, we speak of turning ideas into gold or transforming our lives. The language of alchemy remains embedded in our collective psyche, a reminder of our fascination with change and the unknown. It's a testament to alchemy's enduring appeal that, despite its many failures and fakes, it continues to inspire us. We are drawn to the alchemical promise of transformation, both external and internal, a promise that keeps humanity reaching for the stars, even if it's with nothing more than a ladder and a hopeful heart. But let's not sweep the unsavory bits under the rug. Alchemy's history is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the lure of easy riches. The Renaissance was rife with con artists who exploited the mystique of alchemy for personal gain. These tricksters turned the noble quest for knowledge into a sleight of hand, where the only thing that disappeared was the patron's wealth. It's a stark reminder that for every genuine seeker of truth, there's a snake oil salesman ready to sell you a ticket to nowhere. As we wrap up this journey through fire and brimstone, it's clear that alchemy's story is both a triumph and a tragedy. It's a saga of visionaries and frauds, of dreams and disillusionment. Alchemy was not merely failed science. It was a stepping stone, a sometimes slippery one, towards greater understanding. In their pursuit of the impossible, alchemists pushed the boundaries of knowledge, and in their failures, they laid the foundation for future success. So, here's to the alchemists, those intrepid explorers of the unknown. Though they may not have found the philosopher's stone, they discovered something far more valuable, the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of truth. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring human spirit, the drive to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. As we continue to chase our own modern philosopher's stones, let's remember that the real magic lies not in the destination, but in the journey itself. In the heart of the Andes, long before the age of memes and viral TikToks, the Inca Empire rose like a Google algorithm update, sudden, unexpected, and overwhelmingly influential. Around 1200 CE, in the Cusco Valley, a small tribe started weaving the threads of what would become the largest empire in pre-Columbian America. Picture a group of rugged mountain dwellers, who likely didn't even have a word for chill, deciding they'd conquer a region stretching across modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and beyond. And they did it all without a single YouTube tutorial, or even the wheel. That's right, no wheels. These folks built an empire without the basic thing that even hamsters use for cardio. Now, let's talk about their origin story, which is more myth than fact, but still worth a mention, because who doesn't love a good legend? According to Inca lore, their first ruler, Manco Capac, was either birthed from the sun god in Tai or emerged from a cave. Because when you're starting an empire, you might as well go full mythological. Either way, Manco Capac was said to have divine backing, which is pretty much the ultimate endorsement when you're trying to convince people to follow you into empire building. Fast forward a few centuries, and the Inca were expanding faster than a teenager's social media following. By the late 15th century, under the leadership of Pachacuri, they went from a local power to a sprawling empire in just about 50 years. Here's the kicker. They did it with remarkable efficiency. The Inca didn't just waltz into neighboring territories with an army and a dream. They had tactics that would make even the most seasoned corporate raider take notes. For starters, they offered a mix of diplomacy and intimidation. Join us peacefully, or face the wrath of our well-organized military. Spoiler, many chose the former. Now, how did they manage to keep this vast empire together without the internet's cat videos to distract them? Infrastructure, my friends. The Inca built an extensive network of roads totaling around 25,000 miles. That's enough to make Google Maps weep with inadequacy. Imagine building a road network that stretches 10 times the length of the Great Wall of China, minus the selfie sticks. These roads connected distant parts of the empire and were crucial for military, administrative, and trade purposes. Oh, and did I mention they did this in the Andes? You know, those pesky mountains with their high altitudes and dramatic landscapes. But roads were just the beginning. The Inca were masters of organization. They had a system of runners called chasquis who relayed messages across the empire with a speed and efficiency that would make FedEx blush. No emails, no texts, just pure, unadulterated legwork. And let's not forget about the quippers, their ingenious system of knotted strings used for record keeping. It's like their version of Excel, but with more fiber content. So, what's the takeaway here besides the fact that the Inca were basically the project managers of the ancient world? They governed a massive, diverse area with an astonishing level of control, and they did it without the modern conveniences we take for granted. No wheels, no written language, no Wi-Fi. Just a lot of grit, divine origin stories, and a road network that could make a Roman weep with envy. As we peel back the layers of their history, we see both the romance of their legends and the stark reality of their accomplishments. The Inca Empire was a marvel of human ingenuity, a testament to what can be achieved with a little divine inspiration and a whole lot of hard work. Now, speaking of grit and divine inspiration, let's wade into the intricate web of Inca society, starting at the very top with the Sapa Inca. This guy wasn't just a king. He was a living god, supposedly a direct descendant of the sun god in Tai. Imagine combining the power of a medieval monarch with the divine status of a minor deity, and you've got the Sapa Inca. Talk about job perks. But being a divine ruler wasn't all sunshine and solar flares. You had to maintain an empire of 10 to 12 million souls without the aid of PowerPoint slides or a royal Instagram account. The Sapa Inca's divine status wasn't just for the sake of ego. It was a clever political tool that made dissent almost blasphemous. After all, who wants to argue with the sun's favorite child? But it wasn't just about celestial claims. The Sapa Inca wielded real power, overseeing a complex bureaucracy staffed by a hierarchy of nobles, priests, and administrators. And it was all tightly controlled, with the kind of micromanagement that would make even the most OCD CEO nod in approval. The empire was divided into 4 sayas, or regions, which radiated out from Cusco like the spokes of a cosmic wheel. Each suyu was governed by an official known as an Apu, and they all reported back to the Sapa Inca. This chain of command was as solid as the stones in Machu Picchu, and just as immovable. The Inca knew that an empire wasn't just conquered, it had to be managed, and they did so with a level of organization that would make Marie Kondo proud. Now, let's zoom in on the lives of the common people, the ones who actually made the empire tick. Imagine a day in the life of a typical Inca commoner. You woke up, probably with the sun, because, well, sun god, and went about your day working in fields you didn't own, producing goods for a state that took its cut before you ever saw a kernel of corn. You might think of it as a raw deal, but the Inca had a system that made sure you didn't starve. The state collected taxes in the form of goods and labor, but it also stored surplus food to distribute during lean times. Think of it as socialism meets the ultimate food pantry. One of the most fascinating and complex parts of this system was the mida labor tax. Picture this. Instead of paying taxes in gold or silver, luxuries that the Inca found about as useful as a chocolate teapot, every able-bodied citizen contributed labor to state projects. This wasn't your average community service gig. We're talking about building the very roads and temples that held the empire together. In theory, it was a fair trade. You scratch the empire's back by building its infrastructure, and it scratches yours by keeping you fed and protected. In practice, though, it was more like the empire grabbing your scratchy hand and making sure it did its part. The mida system is often romanticized as a benevolent way to unify the people, but let's not kid ourselves. It was compulsory, and at times backbreaking. Imagine being called up for a mida stint in the high Andes, hauling stones for a temple destined to be admired by tourists centuries later. Sure, you get a meal and some coca leaves to chew on, but let's not pretend it was a vacation package. The reality is that many workers endured harsh conditions and were often far from home for extended periods. Now, let's dismantle another myth: the Inca as purely benevolent rulers. For all their organizational prowess and divine claims, they were still an empire, and empires don't run on goodwill alone. The Inca had a knack for incorporating conquered peoples into their fold, but this was more about strategy than altruism. They'd adjust local customs to fit their imperial agenda, often leaving local leaders in place as long as they towed the line. It was the ancient version of a corporate merger, complete with rebranding and new management. For the Inca, control was key, and they maintained it with a mix of rewards and punishments that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. Loyal subjects could rise through the ranks, gaining prestige and wealth. But step out of line, and you could find yourself relocated to a less desirable part of the empire or worse. The Inca didn't just conquer territories. They reshaped entire landscapes and societies to suit their needs. So, as we peek behind the curtain of Inca society, we find a complex tapestry of divine mandates, rigid control, and pragmatic governance. It's a story of a people who managed to build a formidable empire without the usual trappings of metal tools or written language. They wielded power with an iron grip, wrapped in the silken robes of divine legitimacy. And while their achievements are certainly worthy of admiration, it's essential to remember the human cost behind the marvels of their civilization. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Inca, let's keep our eyes open to both the legends and the realities of their world. Because history, much like the Andes themselves, is full of peaks and valleys. Now, speaking of peaks and valleys, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how the Inca turned one seriously rugged landscape into a thriving empire. Imagine the Andes, towering mountains, freezing nights, and terrain that laughs in the face of conventional farming. Yet, the Inca didn't just survive here, they thrived. How? With a mix of ingenuity and a dash of we don't need no stinking flat land attitude. First up, the terracing techniques. Picture a mountainside as a gigantic natural staircase. The Inca took these slopes and carved out flat terraces, transforming them into fertile plots of land. This wasn't just a clever use of space. It was a stroke of agricultural genius. Each terrace created a microclimate, allowing different crops to flourish at varying altitudes. Some historians estimate that these terraces covered nearly 1 million acres of land. It's like Mother Nature handed them lemons, and the Inca made a 5-star lemon meringue pie. But terracing wasn't just about finding room to grow food. It was also about controlling the environment. The Inca knew that if they wanted to keep their potatoes and quinoa from washing away with the next rainfall, they needed a plan. Enter their sophisticated water management systems. We're talking about canals, aqueducts, and reservoirs that would make a Roman engineer tip their helmet in respect. They even had a drainage system that channeled excess water away from the terraces, preventing erosion and keeping their crops happy. And let's not forget the sheer manpower it took to create these marvels. The Inca relied heavily on the mirror labor system we discussed earlier. Thousands of workers toiled to carve these terraces and build the waterworks necessary to sustain them. Imagine spending your days hauling stones and digging channels at altitudes where the air is thin enough to make you question your life choices. It's safe to say the Inca Empire wasn't built by folks who were afraid of a little manual labor. Now, here's a juicy myth that needs some serious debunking. The idea that the Inca were just peace-loving farmers who happened to stumble upon these techniques. While they certainly didn't have the military-industrial complex of later empires, they were far from pacifists. The Inca were strategic, using their agricultural prowess not just to feed their population, but to exert control over conquered lands. By introducing their superior farming methods, they integrated new territories and people into their empire. It was a kind of agricultural diplomacy that brought both prosperity and dominance. The Incas' agricultural innovations were not just about survival. They were a means of control, a way to bind their vast empire together through shared resources and techniques. At its peak, the empire supported an estimated 10 million people, a figure that would make any ancient ruler green with envy. The surplus food production allowed the Inca to store vast quantities of food in granaries, known as calcas, scattered throughout the empire. These stores were crucial for feeding armies, aiding in times of famine, and solidifying the state's benevolent image. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Incas' reliance on human labor was intense, and the burden often fell heavily on the commoners. While the state might have distributed food during hard times, the reality for many was a life of backbreaking work, dictated by the state's demands. And let's be honest, the Incas' approach to agriculture wasn't just about feeding people, it was about feeding power. Controlling the food supply meant controlling the people, and the Inca excelled at both. The Inca system was a marvel of engineering and organization, but it was also a testament to the lengths they would go to maintain their grip on power. Their terracing and water management weren't just technical achievements, they were strategic moves in the game of empire building. By turning the harsh Andean environment to their advantage, the Inca not only fed their people, but also fortified their rule. As we peel back the layers of their agricultural innovations, we find a story of resilience and resourcefulness, but also one of control and coercion. The Inca Empire was a masterclass in how to bend nature to human will, but it also serves as a reminder of the human cost behind such accomplishments. And as we continue our journey through their history, we'll see that their innovations were only part of a much larger narrative, a narrative of power, ambition, and the delicate dance of empire. But wait, we're not done marveling at the Incas' empire-building prowess just yet. Let's turn our gaze skyward, to the realm of gods and ceremonies, where the Inca didn't just farm potatoes, but also cultivated divine authority like it was the ultimate cash crop. Now, if you think the Inca were just a bunch of sun-worshipping hippies, you're in for a twist as sharp as a Machu Picchu switchback. For starters, the Inca religious system was like a cosmic soap opera, featuring a pantheon of gods who would make even the Greek deities look like a tight-knit family. At the top of this celestial hierarchy was Inti, the sun god, the big cheese, and the celestial CEO. You see, in the Inca worldview, the sun wasn't just a massive ball of burning gas. It was a divine entity that demanded respect, offerings, and the occasional human sacrifice. And when your empire stretches over multiple time zones, keeping that sun happy is serious business. The Sapa Inca, being Inti's alleged golden child, wasn't just a political leader. He was the high priest of the Inca religious hierarchy. This divine endorsement was the political equivalent of having a celestial blue checkmark next to your name. But here's the kicker. Religion wasn't just about spiritual guidance. It was a strategic tool wielded to consolidate power and justify expansion. By linking themselves with divine forces, the Inca rulers reinforced their legitimacy and kept potential usurpers at bay. After all, who would dare challenge a ruler with the sun on speed dial? Now, let's talk about the infamous sun worship ceremonies, because nothing says we're serious about religion quite like a festival that involves both grandeur and a touch of mortality. One of the most significant ceremonies was Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, held during the winter solstice. Imagine Cusco, the heart of the empire, transformed into a bustling hive of activity as people from all corners of the realm gathered to pay homage to the sun. And while today's festivals might involve pyrotechnics and overpriced snacks, in Tai Remi was a spectacle of offerings, dances, and yes, sacrifices. Llamas were the usual victims, though there's evidence that humans occasionally got the short straw. But let's not sugarcoat it. These ceremonies were as much about political theater as they were about religious devotion. Inca religious practices didn't just stop at sun worship, though. The earth goddess Pachamama, the creator god Viracocha, and the moon goddess Mama Quilla all played crucial roles in the spiritual landscape. Each deity had its own set of rituals and ceremonies, and each demanded reverence in its own way. The Inca were nothing if not thorough in their divine bureaucracy. But while the gods may have been many, the purpose was singular, to create a shared belief system that unified the empire's diverse population under a single celestial umbrella. But let's step back from the altar and look at the bigger picture. Religion in the Inca Empire wasn't just a matter of personal faith. It was a device for social cohesion and control. The Inca used religion as a way to integrate conquered peoples, often allowing them to continue their local religious practices as long as they incorporated the Inca gods into their pantheon. It was a bit of give and take, like a divine game of Monopoly where everyone got a piece of the board as long as they played by the empire's rules. Of course, the appeal of these religious myths can't be denied. The idea of a divine hierarchy that mirrors the earthly one has a certain allure. It's a comforting thought that your king is chosen by the gods themselves, rather than by a committee of squabbling nobles. But beneath the surface of these romantic legends lies the cold, hard reality of empire management. The Inca rulers were adept at using religious ideology to maintain their grip on power, ensuring that the empire ran as efficiently as possible. And when it came to expanding their empire, the Inca had a knack for turning religion into a tool of conquest. By portraying themselves as the rightful rulers chosen by the gods, they could justify their imperial ambitions with a divine mandate. It was a strategy that allowed them to expand their territory without resorting solely to military might. The Inca knew that an empire built on faith and fear was often more stable than one built on force alone. As we continue to untangle the complex web of Inca culture and religion, it becomes clear that the line between divine inspiration and political strategy was as thin as the air in the high Andes. The Inca didn't just worship their gods, they wielded them like an ancient power tool, shaping an empire that was as much about spiritual unity as it was about earthly dominion. And while the sun may have set on their empire centuries ago, the legacy of their celestial maneuvers continues to shine brightly in the annals of history. So, as we turn our eyes from the sacred to the secular, keep in mind that the Inca's story is far from finished. We've only just begun to explore the depth of their achievements and the complexities of their rule. There's more to discover about these masters of the Andes, and we'll continue to unravel the mysteries and marvels of their world in the chapters to come. Stay tuned, because the sun god might be watching, but we've still got plenty of ground to cover in this epic saga of power, faith, and empire. And as we shift our focus from divine schemes to earthly upheavals, we enter the 16th century, a time when the Inca Empire, a colossus of the Andes, faced its greatest challenge yet. Enter the Spaniards, with their shiny armor, insatiable greed, and germs that made smallpox look like the ultimate uninvited guest. You see, the Spanish arrival in 1532 wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a seismic event that rocked the empire more violently than any Andean earthquake. At the helm of this colonial juggernaut was Francisco Pizarro, a man so determined that even the mountains seemed like minor inconveniences. Pizarro was no stranger to the New World. He'd already had a taste of the riches that lay beyond the horizon and wasn't about to let a little altitude sickness stand in his way. Now, if you think the Spaniards simply waltzed in and took over, you're in for a reality check sharper than a conquistador's sword. The conquest was less about valor and more about timing, germs, and a hefty dose of internal strife within the Inca ranks. First, let's talk about the timing. The Inca Empire was in the midst of its own civil war when Pizarro and his merry band of fortune hunters arrived on the scene. The conflict was between two half-brothers, Atahualpa and Huascar, each vying for the throne in a power struggle more intense than a modern-day soap opera. This internal conflict had already drained the empire's resources and weakened its defenses, setting the stage for a Spanish conquest that was as much about exploiting existing fractures as it was about military might. Now, about those germs. Smallpox, that notorious hitchhiker of European exploration, had already made its way to the Inca Empire, thanks to earlier Spanish incursions further north. It swept through the population like wildfire, decimating communities and causing chaos. The Inca, who had no immunity to such diseases, suffered catastrophic losses. It's estimated that smallpox alone killed millions, crippling the empire before the Spaniards even set foot in Cusco. Forget guns and steel. Disease was the real weapon of mass destruction. And then there were the blunders, both strategic and otherwise. Atahualpa, fresh from defeating Huascar, made the classic mistake of underestimating his opponent, a fatal flaw in any Game of Thrones. Inviting Pizarro to meet him at Cajamarca, Atahualpa arrived with thousands of unarmed retainers, likely assuming that a show of force would be enough to intimidate these strange newcomers. Instead, Pizarro pulled off a coup de theater worthy of an Oscar, capturing Atahualpa in a surprise attack and demanding a ransom that would make even the most hardened pirates blush. The Inca paid in gold and silver, filling room after room with treasures that would eventually fund Spain's rise as a global power. And yet, despite the ransom, Atahualpa was executed. Talk about a raw deal. But let's not romanticize this as a simple tale of European superiority. The Spaniards may have had superior weapons, but they also had an uncanny knack for exploiting political divisions and leveraging them to their advantage. The Inca Empire was a vast, sprawling entity, and not everyone was thrilled with the central authority. By allying with disaffected local groups, the Spaniards were able to bolster their ranks and turn what might have been a suicidal mission into a successful campaign of conquest. In the aftermath, the Spaniards laid waste to the Incas' meticulously organized society. They dismantled the administrative structures that had kept the empire running like a well-oiled machine, replacing them with a colonial system that prioritized extraction over sustainability. Yet, even as the empire crumbled, the legacy of the Inca endured. Their road systems, agricultural techniques, and cultural practices left an indelible mark on the landscape and the people of South America. Today, the echoes of the Inca resonate in the Andes and beyond. The terraces they carved into the mountainsides are still in use, a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. The Quechua language, once the lingua franca of the empire, is spoken by millions, keeping the spirit of the Inca alive in the modern world. And while the Spanish conquest may have toppled the political structure of the empire, it couldn't erase the cultural foundations that continue to influence Andean societies. So, as we wrap up this saga of the Inca, it's clear that their story is one of resilience and endurance. They were masters of adaptation, capable of transforming a challenging environment into a thriving civilization. And even in their fall, they left behind a legacy that transcends the ruins of Machu Picchu and the stones of Cusco. The Inca remind us that while empires may rise and fall, the spirit of a people, and their ability to adapt and innovate, can endure against the greatest of odds. As the sun sets on this chapter of history, we find ourselves inspired by the Inca's ingenuity, and reminded of the complex dance of power, ambition, and survival that defines the human story. We're standing in the dry, dusty heat of ancient Egypt, and today's agenda is far from ordinary. Forget about building pyramids or debating with pharaohs. You're about to witness the ultimate preparation for the afterlife, a process so elaborate that it would make even the most extravagant wedding planner blink in disbelief. Welcome to the world of mummification, the ancient Egyptian ritual that said, "I'm dead, but still a big deal." So, what's the first step, you ask? Well, the ancient Egyptians weren't messing around. They believed the afterlife was as real as the Nile flooding every year. To ensure you entered the next world with style, you needed to be preserved better than a celebrity on a magazine cover. Enter the embalmers, the rock stars of the afterlife business. They were the ones who, for a hefty fee, would ensure your body was ready to meet the gods. And by hefty, we're talking up to 365 debons of copper, a currency that could buy you an entire herd of cattle. This isn't your typical slapdash preservation job. The process was a 70-day ordeal involving some truly eyebrow-raising techniques. First, they'd extract your brain through your nose with a hook. Why? Because, apparently, ancient Egyptians thought your grey matter was about as useful as a pair of flip-flops in a desert. The brain was discarded like yesterday's papyrus. Meanwhile, your heart was treated like the crown jewel, left in place as the seat of intelligence and emotion. Clearly, the Egyptians were ahead of their time in ignoring the brain's role in human personality. Now, let's not gloss over the financial side of things. This was big business. Embalmers had a tiered pricing system, much like your local car wash. If you had the means, you could opt for the deluxe package, complete with gold leaf and exotic resins. If your budget was tight, well, let's just say your trip to the afterlife might involve a few more detours. The whole process wasn't just about preserving your good looks. It was a status symbol, a way to flaunt wealth even in death. In a society where the living and the dead mingled in the spiritual realm, your mummification was your calling card, your hello, I was rich and important message to the gods and fellow spirits. And let's not forget the practical side of embalming. Keeping bodies around in the sweltering heat required some serious skill. The embalmers were masters of their craft, using natron, a naturally occurring salt mix, to dehydrate the body. They'd even pack your insides with linen and sawdust to keep everything in place, like a pharaoh's version of bubble wrap. Talk about commitment to the cause. But what about the myths? Those tales of curses and mystical powers that Hollywood loves to spin. The truth is, most of these stories are as inflated as a pharaoh's ego. The idea of the mummified undead wreaking havoc is more fiction than fact. The real magic lay in the preservation techniques that allowed people to see the deceased just as they were, a testament to human ingenuity and a deep-seated belief in life after death. So why did they do it? Beyond the spiritual reasons, there was a hefty dose of social pressure and economic motivation. Your mummification was a public statement of your family's wealth and devotion. It kept embalmers in business and artisans employed. And let's face it, in ancient Egypt, keeping up with the Joneses meant ensuring your afterlife was as lavish as your earthly life. Let's not overlook the social fabric that wove this all together. The elite, of course, had the most intricate mummification processes. A wealthy nobleman's tomb was a veritable treasure trove, a display of power and prosperity. But even the humbler folk aspired to some form of preservation, albeit on a more modest scale. It was a societal norm, a shared cultural belief that transcended class lines. And while we're at it, let's take a moment to appreciate the embalmers themselves. These guys weren't just butchers with a knack for preservation. They were highly respected, almost mystical figures who knew the secrets of life and death. You could say they were the original influencers, with a following that spanned both sides of the Nile. In the end, mummification was more than just a bizarre ritual. It was a mirror reflecting the values, beliefs, and economic realities of ancient Egypt. It was a practice deeply rooted in the human desire to overcome mortality, to leave a legacy that would endure long after the sands of time had swallowed the last traces of earthly existence. So, as you stand there, contemplating the curious balance of faith and practicality, you can almost hear the whispers of the past. It's a reminder that even in death, the ancient Egyptians lived vividly, with one eye always on eternity. And speaking of eternity, let's shift gears from the afterlife to the here and now of ancient Egypt, where the festivities were as lively as a cat in a field of catnip. Enter the festival rituals of the Nile, the social events that made Coachella look like a neighborhood potluck. Imagine a sea of people, the air thick with the smell of roasted meats and the sound of music, harps, flutes, and the ever-popular sistrum, a rattle that got ancient Egyptians shaking it like they meant it. Now, you might be wondering why these festivals were such a big deal. Well, think of them as the ancient version of a public holiday, only instead of a long weekend, you got a full-blown extravaganza worthy of the gods themselves. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was the lifeline of Egypt, and its annual flood was celebrated with religious zeal. The floodwaters brought silt and fertility, transforming barren lands into a breadbasket. So naturally, when the river behaved, it was time to party. These festivals weren't just about thanking the Nile, though. They were a chance for everyone, from nobles to commoners, to let loose. Picture this, beer flowing like the Nile itself, with the average Joe drinking more than a case of Budweiser at a tailgate. Beer was so integral to these celebrations that it was practically a dietary staple. It wasn't just any beer either. We're talking about a thick, porridge-like brew that kept you full and perhaps a bit too merry. The economic side of these festivals is worth a closer look. These weren't DIY affairs. The state sponsored many of these events, with the temple estates footing a hefty part of the bill. In a way, these festivals were state-sanctioned opportunities to reinforce social cohesion and remind the populace of their place in the grand scheme. It was like a subtle, hey, look how generous we are from the ruling class, while also ensuring everyone remained a cog in the societal machine. But let's not get too carried away with the idea of a happy, beer-buzzed peasantry. Contrary to the rosy picture of ancient Egyptians dancing in harmony, the reality was a bit more layered. The happy peasant myth is as misleading as a mirage in the desert. Sure, there were moments of joy and community, but the economic pressure on the lower classes was immense. These festivals offered a brief respite from back-breaking labor, but the cost of participation was steep. Imagine spending your hard-earned debon to celebrate, knowing that once the festivities ended, it was back to the grindstone. And it wasn't just the commoners who felt the pinch. Even the pharaoh's workers, those who toiled on royal projects like the grand temples and pyramids, had their breaking points. Enter the world's first recorded workers' strike, a testament to the fact that even in the land of the pyramids, workers demanded fair treatment. Around 1159 BC, during the reign of Ramses III, laborers at Deir el-Medina downed tools. Their grievance: they hadn't been paid in rations. No bread, no work. Sound familiar? It's the ancient equivalent of show me the money, only with flatbread and grain. This strike wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was an organized protest, complete with a sit-in at the temple of Ramses III. These workers had more than just grievances. They had guts. They marched to the temple, demanded their dues, and refused to budge until their voices were heard. And believe it or not, they got results. The authorities scrambled to meet their demands, proving that even in ancient Egypt, the squeaky wheel got the grease, or in this case, their rations. So, while the festivals were painted as joyous occasions, they also highlighted the social dynamics at play. The elites might have been clinking cups, but the reality for many was a balancing act between celebration and survival. Despite the glamour of the festivities, the economic and social structures remained, much like the pyramids themselves, immovable, awe-inspiring, but heavy with the weight of history. And let's not forget the role of the temples. They were the powerhouses behind these festivals, wielding economic influence that extended beyond spiritual matters. Temples owned vast tracts of land and employed thousands, making them the ancient equivalent of multinational corporations. When they threw a festival, it was more than a religious event. It was a statement of wealth and power, a reminder of their place in the societal hierarchy. Yet, amidst the grandeur and the grit, there was a certain magic to these celebrations. It was a rare moment of unity where the divine and the mundane collided, where the barriers of class and status blurred, if only for a fleeting moment. People danced, sang, and indulged, temporarily forgetting the long road back to their daily toil. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find joy even in the face of adversity. As we peel back the layers of these ancient parties, it's clear that the Nile festivals were more than just a series of grand feasts and ceremonies. They were a reflection of the complex tapestry that was ancient Egyptian society, a vivid mosaic of joy and struggle, faith and reality. And as we stand here, hearing the echoes of laughter and the distant hum of the sistrum, it's a reminder that even thousands of years ago, humans found ways to celebrate life in all its messy, glorious splendor. As the echoes of ancient laughter and music fade, let's pivot to something that might seem a tad peculiar to our modern sensibilities: feeding the gods. Yes, you heard right. The Egyptians were staunch believers in keeping their deities well fed. Imagine a banquet where the guests of honor are stone statues, and you'll get the picture. You might wonder, did these statues ever reach for the bread? Well, that's a different story. The Egyptians didn't skimp when it came to their divine dining etiquette. Every day, temple priests laid out a veritable buffet for the gods. We're talking bread, beer, meat, and vegetables, all the essentials for a balanced breakfast, or in this case, a divine offering. These weren't just symbolic gestures either. They involved real, tangible food. Now, why would they do this? The answer lies in a mix of faith, tradition, And you guessed it, politics. Imagine the temple as the ancient equivalent of a Fortune 500 company, one with a direct line to the celestial boardroom. Priests were the middlemen, ensuring that divine and moral affairs ran smoothly. Feeding the gods wasn't just about piety. It was a strategic move to demonstrate power and stability. A well-fed god was a happy god, and a happy god meant a prosperous kingdom. But here's where things get interesting. Those offerings, once presented, didn't just gather dust. After a period of divine consumption, think of it as a spiritual tasting menu. The food was redistributed. Yes, priests and temple workers got to enjoy the leftovers. Talk about a heavenly perk. This practice wasn't just about avoiding waste. It reinforced the temple's role as a vital economic hub, feeding not just the guards, but also the local community. Now, let's talk manpower and resources. Temples weren't run by a couple of priests and a donkey. They were sprawling enterprises employing hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. From scribes to bakers, everyone had a role in maintaining the cosmic balance. And let's not forget the gold. Temples were wealthy institutions that controlled vast tracts of land and resources. They had their fingers in every pie, managing estates, collecting taxes, and trading goods. It was a divine economy, where spiritual and material wealth were two sides of the same coin. But feeding stone statues isn't the only eyebrow-raising ritual in the Egyptian playbook. Enter the mysteries of Osiris, a cult that makes your local secret society look like an open book. Revered as the god of the afterlife, Osiris had a following as devoted as a modern-day fandom. His story, a saga of betrayal, death, and resurrection, was reenacted in secret ceremonies that promised initiates a glimpse of the afterlife. Think of it as a spiritual blockbuster, with high stakes and an even higher budget. These rituals weren't just about storytelling, they were a profound expression of faith and identity. Participants believed that by aligning themselves with Osiris, they too would triumph over death. But here's the kicker. These ceremonies were tightly controlled, exclusive affairs. Only the chosen few got the backstage pass, emphasizing the social hierarchies that permeated Egyptian life. It was a reminder that even in matters of the soul, status mattered. Speaking of status, let's dive into the political power plays at work in these temple rituals. Pharaohs, those divine kings on earth, used religion as a tool to legitimize their rule. By associating themselves with gods like Ra, the sun deity, they reinforced their divine right to govern. Temples were more than religious centers. They were propaganda machines, broadcasting the pharaoh's status as a living god. This wasn't just smoke and mirrors. Temples wielded real political clout. Their influence extended into every corner of Egyptian society, from lawmaking to economic policy. Priests were power brokers, mediating between the divine and the earthly realms. And in a society where religion and politics were inseparable, temples were the beating heart of both spiritual and state affairs. But let's not romanticize the past without a healthy dose of skepticism. The notion of benevolent priests and pious pharaohs is as polished as a temple obelisk. Behind the grandeur lay a complex web of power dynamics, where personal ambition and divine duty often blurred. Political rivalries simmered beneath the surface, with temples playing a key role in the high-stakes Game of Thrones. Take the case of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who dared to challenge the status quo. He turned the religious establishment on its head by promoting the worship of Aten, the sun disk, over the traditional pantheon. Temples dedicated to other gods suffered as a result, leading to tensions that rocked the very foundations of Egyptian society. It was a bold move, one that underscored the volatile relationship between power and faith. Yet, amidst the intrigue and the opulence, the rituals of ancient Egypt reveal something timeless, the human quest for meaning in a world governed by forces beyond our control. Whether through offerings to stone deities or secret rites in honor of Osiris, the Egyptians sought to navigate the mysteries of existence with the tools at their disposal. And as we unravel these rituals, we're reminded that the past, with all its strangeness and splendor, holds a mirror to our own struggles with faith, power, and the eternal dance of life and death. So, as we stand here, caught between the shadows of pyramids and the whispers of ancient prayers, let's keep the story moving. There's more to explore, from the grandeur of temple ceremonies to the everyday lives of those who serve the gods. The sands of time may shift, but the tales of ancient Egypt remain, waiting to be uncovered. one ritual at a time. And speaking of the everyday lives of those who serve the gods, let's dive into a realm where the lines between magic, medicine, and a good dose of superstition were as blurred as the Nile on a foggy morning. Welcome to the world of Egyptian, magical and healing rituals, where practicality often wore the clever disguise of the supernatural. Picture this. You're an ancient Egyptian with a toothache more persistent than a pyramid-building foreman. What do? You might reach for a spell as quickly as you'd grab a bag of herbal remedies, a fascinating blend of faith and first aid. Let's start with one of the more eyebrow-raising practices, the use of crocodile dung. Yes, you heard me right. In a time when band-aids were as fictional as unicorns, crocodile dung was applied as a contraceptive measure. Talk about thinking outside the box, or, in this case, the nest. The method involved mixing the dung with fermented dough and inserting it as a pessary. While today's medical professionals would raise a skeptical eyebrow, the Egyptians believed in its efficacy. It was all about creating a hostile environment. Let's be honest, nothing says, "do not enter," quite like crocodile dung. Now, before you dismiss the whole thing as ancient nonsense, consider this. Some of these remedies had a dash of scientific merit. The acidity in dung could have had spermicidal properties, although the method was more trial and error than clinical trial. Still, it shows the Egyptians were willing to experiment and adapt, an admirable trait, whether you're in ancient Thebes or modern-day Chicago. But wait, there's more. The realm of Egyptian medicine was as vast as the desert sands. Egyptians were pioneers in the art of combining magic with healing, as demonstrated by the Ebers Papyrus, medical document from around 1550 BC. It's like the WebMD of the ancient world, offering remedies for everything from headaches to crocodile bites. One standout treatment involved a mix of honey and willow bark, a concoction that wouldn't be out of place in a modern pharmacy. Honey, with its antibacterial properties, and willow bark, the precursor to aspirin, were centuries ahead of their time. Of course, not every remedy was a home run. Some treatments were more about the theatrics than the cure. Imagine a priest waving a wand, yes, like a wizard, over a patient while reciting incantations to banish demons. Because naturally, if you had a cough, it was obviously the work of a malevolent spirit. And while we're on the topic of spirits, the Egyptians had a spell for everything. Bothered by nightmares, there's a spell for that. Worried about scorpions, spell it away. It was a culture where the mystical and the mundane danced an intricate waltz. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. The idea that these magical practices were purely superstitious mumbo-jumbo is as misguided as assuming cats don't care about world domination. The Egyptians weren't just sitting around chanting spells. They were actively engaging with the world in a deeply spiritual and practical way. Their rituals were a reflection of their understanding of the universe, a place where gods, humans, and nature were inextricably linked. Take, for instance, the role of the SW&W, or physician. These were highly trained individuals who combined medical knowledge with religious rituals. They weren't just treating symptoms. They were addressing the spiritual and physical well-being of their patients. It was holistic medicine before the term was even coined. And while some of their methods might make us cringe today, their approach was rooted in observation and experience. Let's not ignore the economic side of things. Magic and medicine were big business. Temples, the epicenters of both spiritual and medical knowledge, offered services that were as much about commerce as they were about care. The wealthy could afford the deluxe treatment, spells, potions, and the works, while the less affluent had to make do with simpler, more accessible remedies. It was a tiered system, not unlike healthcare today, where your options depended on your ability to pay. But amid the incantations and potions, there was a stark reality. The life expectancy in ancient Egypt was about 35 years, a reminder that despite their ingenuity, the Egyptians were at the mercy of a harsh environment and limited resources. Diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and smallpox were rampant, and infant mortality was heartbreakingly high. In a world where the gods were ever present, it was little wonder that magic was woven into the fabric of daily life. It offered hope and a semblance of control in an unpredictable world. And while we're peeling back the layers of ancient Egyptian medicine, let's nod to pop culture. Movies love to portray Egyptian magic as a force of chaos and wonder, a narrative as sticky as a mummy's bandages. But the truth is both more mundane and more intriguing. Egyptian magical practices were grounded in the idea of mart, balance and order. It was about maintaining harmony in a world teetering on the brink of chaos, a concept as relevant now as it was then. So, as we unravel these ancient practices, it's clear that they were more than just relics of a bygone era. They were a testament to the Egyptians' resilience and resourcefulness, traits that resonate through the ages. Whether it was through spells, potions, or a healthy dose of crocodile dung, the Egyptians were pioneers in the art of blending belief with practicality. And while we might chuckle at their more outlandish remedies, there's no denying their enduring legacy. As we wrap up this foray into the whimsical world of Egyptian healing, let's keep the story alive. There's more to explore, from the rituals that punctuated everyday life to the grand ceremonies that shaped an empire. The sands of time may have shifted, but the echoes of ancient Egypt remain, waiting to be discovered, one spell at a time. And now, as we leave behind the potions and spells of ancient Egyptian medicine, let's ascend to the realm of the pharaohs, where power was as solid as a limestone block and ambition as boundless as the desert horizon. Here, the rituals of royalty were not merely about pomp and circumstance. They were grand spectacles of political theater, where tombs doubled as monuments to human hubris. Welcome to the world of the Egyptian elite, where building your own pyramid was the ultimate mark of immortality, at least until the sands of time decided otherwise. Let's cut to the chase. Pyramid building wasn't just about ensuring a pharaoh's comfy afterlife. Sure, that sarcophagus had to be plush enough to make the journey to the underworld feel like a first-class flight, but the real intrigue lay in the politics. Constructing a pyramid was like erecting an eternal billboard. Here lies Pharaoh so-and-so, the greatest of them all. It was about leaving a legacy that outlasted your reign, your descendants, and ideally, your rivals. And what a legacy it was. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, the piece de resistance of ancient Egypt's architectural feats. Commissioned by Pharaoh Khufu around 2580 BC, this wonder wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement. Standing at an original height of 481 feet and consisting of approximately 3 million stone blocks, each weighing up to 80 tons, the pyramid was less about architectural flair and more about a physical manifestation of power. And let's not forget the labor force. Tens of thousands of workers, not slaves as often mischaracterized, but skilled laborers and craftsmen who were housed, fed, and sometimes even paid in beer, Egypt's liquid gold. But here's the kicker. The pyramids were as much about economics as they were about eternity. The construction of these behemoths required a well-oiled supply chain that would make Amazon envious. The economy thrived on the demand for limestone, copper tools, and food supplies to sustain the workforce. It was an economic engine that kept Egypt buzzing, a fact often overshadowed by the romanticized vision of slaves toiling under a tyrant's whip. Now, let's peel back another layer of this stone onion. While the grandeur of the pyramids captures our imagination, the truth is, they were also political tools. Each block was a testament to a pharaoh's ability to mobilize resources and command loyalty. And in a society where the divine right to rule was etched in stone, literally, the bigger your pyramid, more you could flex your royal muscle. It was a colossal game of one-upmanship, with each pharaoh trying to outdo their predecessor. Yet as grand as these structures were, they were not immune to the whims of time and politics. The collapse of pharaonic power led to a shift in tomb-building practices. The Valley of the Kings, with its discreetly hidden tombs, rose to prominence during the New Kingdom era, circa 1550-1070 BC. Here, pharaohs like Tutankhamun were interred in underground complexes, a practical response to grave robbers who saw the pyramids as Giant X marks the spot for treasure hunting. Speaking of Tutankhamun, or King Tut, as he's affectionately known, his tomb's discovery in 1922 was a media sensation that catapulted Egyptian antiquities into global pop culture. Yet, the boy king's fame is more about the sheer volume of artifacts found in his relatively modest tomb than any grand accomplishments during his short reign. It's a stark reminder that sometimes history's attention favors the lucky over the deserving. Now, let's zoom out and consider the legacy of these rituals and monuments. The romanticized image of Egypt, the pyramids, the mummies, the hieroglyphs, continues to captivate us, a testament to the enduring allure of the ancient world. But beneath this fascination lies a more complex narrative. The pyramids, while iconic, were part of a broader tapestry of power, economy, and social structure. They were as much about the living as the dead, a reflection of a society striving to maintain order and assert dominance in a world of shifting sands. In modern culture, the legacy of Egyptian rituals manifests itself in everything from blockbuster films to Halloween costumes. We've turned mummies into monsters and pharaohs into figures of mystery, often ignoring the intricate realities of the civilization that birthed them. This allure, though, is not without its pitfalls. The romantic narratives gloss over the economic and political machinations that underpinned these ancient practices. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Egypt's grandiose rituals, let's take a moment to appreciate their true significance. Beyond the myths and the Hollywood sheen lies a civilization that was as innovative as it was enigmatic. The rituals of ancient Egypt were a testament to their ingenuity, their struggle for immortality, and their ability to navigate the complexities of life and death. In the end, the pyramids and the tombs, the festivals and the feasts are more than relics of a bygone era. They are echoes of human ambition and creativity, reminders that even in the face of the unknown, we strive to leave our mark on the world. And as we stand here, with the desert wind whispering secrets of a time long past, we are reminded that history is not just a series of events, but a continuous dialogue between the past and the present. So, dear listener, as you drift off into the sands of sleep, ponder this. The rituals of ancient Egypt, with all their grandeur and complexity, are not just stories of a distant past. They are a mirror, reflecting our own desires for legacy, power, and understanding in a world as unpredictable as the Nile itself. Sweet dreams, and may the echoes of history guide you through the night. The rooster's call jolts you awake, but this isn't your cozy suburban alarm clock. No, you're in feudal Japan, and it's 5 a.m. The sun's just creeping over the horizon, casting a faint glow through the paper-thin walls of your samurai dwelling. You roll over on your straw tatami mat, wishing you could hit snooze, but that's not how life works here. Welcome to the Edo period, where every day starts with a splash of cold reality, and sometimes literal cold water. Let's get one thing clear. Being a samurai isn't the romanticized dreamscape of luxury and honor that popular culture often peddles. Sure, you've got your katana, your kimono, and that iconic top knot, but the reality is far less flattering. You're living in a house that's more drafty than your college dorm room, with walls made of wood and paper. It's great for letting in a cool breeze, not so much for keeping out the winter chill. And this morning, the chill cuts through sharper than any blade. You're up, dressed, and ready to face the day, but let's pause to talk about Bushido, the vaunted samurai code. Ah, Bushido, the moral compass of warriors, the stuff of legend. It's all about loyalty, honor, and discipline. Sounds noble, right? But here's the kicker. This rigid code also means you're bound to a life of servitude to your daimyo, the feudal lord who calls the shots. One wrong move, and it's harakiri, the ritual suicide that's as brutal as it sounds. Talk about living on the edge. Now, you might think being part of the ruling class comes with some perks. After all, samurai were the military elite, wielding power and influence. But hold your horses, or should I say, hold your horses on a very tight budget. You see, many samurai were more strapped for cash than a broke college student by the end of the semester. The economic divide between the ruling class and the peasantry was as wide as the Pacific Ocean, except you're drowning in debt rather than salty waves. The samurai's stipend, paid in rice, because who needs cash when you've got carbs, right? Doesn't stretch as far as you'd hope, while a high-ranking samurai might rake in about 500 koku per year. A koku being roughly what it takes to feed one person for a year. Those on the lower end might be scraping by with as little as 10 koku. Do the math, and you'll see why your samurai lifestyle isn't exactly a parade of opulence. Sure, you're trained in martial arts and have the privilege of wearing 2 swords, but you're also expected to maintain appearances on a shoestring budget. You're basically the original broke influencer, trying to look the part without breaking the bank, all while maintaining that stoic samurai poker face. And let's not forget your samurai breakfast, which is a far cry from your usual avocado toast or smoothie bowl. Today's menu: rice, pickles, and maybe some miso soup if you're lucky. It's simple, it's humble, and it's about as exciting as watching paint dry. But hey, it fills you up just enough to get through the morning chores. Speaking of chores, the samurai life isn't just about swinging swords and reciting poetry. You're also expected to manage the household, oversee the peasant farmers working your land, and attend to any tasks your daimyo deems important. You might be a warrior, but you're also a glorified admin assistant, minus the ergonomic chair and office snacks. As you head out to inspect the fields, you can't help but notice the stark contrast between your life and that of the peasants. These folks are the backbone of the agricultural economy, working tirelessly to produce the rice that fills your storeroom. They're up before dawn, toiling under the sun, and going to bed just to do it all over again the next day. And while they might not face the threat of seppuku, their lives are far from easy, bound by their own set of obligations and social rules. Economic disparity is glaring. While samurai like you are technically above the peasants in the social hierarchy, many of them might be better off financially, or at least less burdened by debt. It's a complex web of social dynamics where everyone's got their place, but not everyone's got it easy. By mid-morning, you're knee-deep in the realities of samurai life, which involves more bureaucracy and less glory than you'd anticipated. But hey, at least you're not bored. As you make your rounds, checking in on the peasant farmers and ensuring everything's running smoothly, you can't help but appreciate the sheer industriousness of it all. It's like watching a well-oiled machine, each cog playing its part, even if some cogs are rustier than others. So there you have it. The myth of the noble samurai living in lavish luxury, thoroughly debunked. You're navigating a world that demands strict adherence to duty and honor, while grappling with the very real challenges of staying afloat financially. It's a balancing act, and you're walking a tightrope without a safety net. As you continue through your day, remember that the samurai code might be your guiding star, but the reality is that life in feudal Japan is a far cry from the romantic tales. It's a world where loyalty, duty, and economic realities clash in a daily struggle for survival. And you've only just begun your journey through this historical landscape. Buckle up. It's going to be a long day. And speaking of survival, let's talk about breakfast, your first meal in this feudal fever dream. Spoiler alert, pumpkin spice lattes and avocado toast are off the menu. Instead, you're about to dive into a culinary adventure consisting mostly of rice, miso soup, and fish. Welcome to the gastronomic reality of the Edo period, where your breakfast is as simple as it gets, but hey, at least it's honest. Now let's address the elephant, or perhaps the missing caffeinated beverage, in the room. Coffee. Forget about it. You're in 17th century Japan, where the beans haven't even made their way into the cultural consciousness. Tea, on the other hand, is the drink of choice, but don't expect a frothy matcha latte art masterpiece. Your morning brew is more about function than Instagrammable flair. Your breakfast centerpiece is rice, the staple that kept the whole country ticking. If you're picturing a fluffy mountain of jasmine rice, think again. This is brown rice, folks, nutty, chewy, and unpolished, just like your life here. Rice wasn't just food, it was currency. Samurai were paid in koku, a unit of measure based on how much rice it took to feed one person for a year. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. So why rice, you ask? It's the backbone of the economy, the gold standard in a land where the actual gold was often too scarce to go around. Rice was so vital that entire political and economic systems were constructed around its production and distribution. Feudal Japan didn't just run on rice, it was practically built on it. And here's a fun fact. Rice wasn't just for eating or paying samurai, it was even used to pay taxes. Imagine handing the IRS a bag of Uncle Ben's come April. Speaking of logistics, getting this rice from paddies to your bowl was no small feat. Farmers, those unsung heroes of the Edo period, were the ones making it happen. Picture them knee-deep in muddy fields, breaking their backs to ensure that the samurai's breakfast bowl was full. Despite their Herculean efforts, they were considered a rung above merchants in the social hierarchy. Why, you ask? Because they produced what was deemed essential for survival. Merchants, with their shifty trade and pesky capitalism, were seen as necessary evils. In the rigid class system, being a farmer meant you were honored for providing sustenance, even if you lacked the financial clout of the merchants below you. Now, let's talk miso soup. This isn't your fancy restaurant's miso with tofu and seaweed. We're talking about a humble broth that's more about sustenance than taste explosion. Fermented soybean paste mixed with water and maybe, just maybe, a sprinkle of dried fish if you're feeling lucky. It's not going to win any culinary awards, but it's warm, nourishing, and pairs perfectly with your rice. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of comfort food, minus the cheese. And then there's the fish. Japan, being an island nation, had access to the bounty of the sea, but don't get your hopes up for a sushi feast. Fish was often salted or dried to preserve it, turning it into a chewy, salty companion to your rice and soup. It's no sashimi platter, but it'll keep you fueled for the morning. This breakfast isn't just about filling your belly. It's a reflection of the agrarian economy and social structure. The simplicity of your meal mirrors the straightforward, no-frills life of the samurai. There's a beauty in this simplicity, a connection to the land, and see that nourishes you both figuratively and literally. But let's not romanticize it too much. After all, you're still hungry for more than just food. You're hungry for a world that isn't bound by the rigid expectations and economic limitations of feudal society. As you contemplate the realities of your breakfast, both the nourishment and the symbolism, you can't help but appreciate the intricate dance that is feudal Japan. It's a world where every grain of rice matters, where every drop of miso tells a story. The samurai's life may not be the glamorous spectacle of honor and chivalry that stories often suggest, but it's a fascinating blend of duty, simplicity, and survival. The morning light grows stronger, casting long shadows in your austere dwelling. Your breakfast is done, and it's time to move on to the next chapter of your day. But as you step outside, you carry with you the weight of the rice, the warmth of the soup, and the salty tang of the fish, a meal that sustains not just your body, but the entire social order. It's a reminder that in this world, food is more than just sustenance. It's a currency, a culture, and a symbol of the interconnectedness of life here. So, buckle up and hold on to your top knot, because the day is just getting started, and feudal Japan waits for no one. With your stomach fortified by the morning's carb-heavy breakfast, it's time to face the rigors of samurai training. Forget the Hollywood glamour of graceful duels and choreographed swordplay. This is more boot camp than ballet. The reality of samurai life is a grueling regimen that could make a modern-day triathlete sweat bullets. You're not just swinging swords for the thrill of it. You're honing skills for survival in a world where missteps can lead to messy ends. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty. Samurai training was a full-body workout long before gym memberships and CrossFit were a thing. Starting with kenjutsu, the art of the sword, you practiced swinging your katana until your arms felt like they were made of lead. And no, you're not slicing through bamboo mats in a Zen garden. You're engaging in repetitive drills designed to instill muscle memory, the kind that means your body reacts even when your mind is screaming, nap time. Mastery of the katana required precision and patience, the kind that makes threading a needle seem like child's play. But here's the kicker. Swordsmanship was just the tip of the iceberg. Archery, or kudo, was another essential skill. Picture yourself in a field, the bow's string taut against your cheek, aiming at a target that seems miles away. The precision required rivals that of a Swiss watchmaker. And yet, this wasn't just about hitting bullseyes. It was a spiritual practice meant to cultivate focus and discipline. Think of it as Zen and the art of projectile maintenance. Now, let's talk about the elephant-sized price tag in the room, armor. The iconic samurai armor, or yoroi, wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a small fortune strapped to your body. Made from iron, leather, and lacquered plates, it could weigh upwards of 60 pounds. Imagine hauling that around while trying to maintain the grace of a dancer and the ferocity of a lion. The cost, equivalent to a year's salary for a low-ranking samurai. So, next time you're grumbling about the price of a pair of designer jeans, remember that your sartorial choices probably won't mean life or death. Beyond the physical, samurai training demanded mental fortitude. You weren't just training your body. You were sharpening your mind to be as keen as your blade. Philosophy of Zanshin, or remaining mind, was central, a state of relaxed alertness that meant you were always ready, physically and mentally, for the unexpected. In other words, your head had to be on a swivel, prepared for anything, from an ambush to an awkward dinner with the in-laws. Now, let's take a detour from the dojo to the dusty streets of Edo, where merchants ply their trade. You might think that being the wheels of commerce would afford them respect and comfort. Think again. Merchants were considered the lowest of the low in the social hierarchy, seen as profit-driven parasites who contributed little to society's spiritual and moral fabric. Yet, ironically, they controlled the flow of goods that kept the economy churning. It's like being the unpopular kid who owns all the toys. These enterprising folks had to navigate a world that looked down on them, all while making sure their ledgers balanced. They couldn't flaunt their wealth. Oh no. Doing so might invite the wrath of the authorities or a jealous noble with a grudge. So they kept a low profile, living in modest homes and dressing in subdued colors. It was a game of smoke and mirrors, a delicate dance of discretion and prosperity. Speaking of outcasts, let's bust some myths about the romanticized Ronin, the masterless samurai who supposedly wandered the land like medieval rock stars. In reality, being a Ronin wasn't a glamorous gig. It was more unemployed and desperate than free spirit. Without a lord to serve, you were essentially a freelance warrior hustling for gigs wherever you could find them. And let's be honest, the gig economy back then wasn't exactly thriving. Many Ronin ended up as mercenaries or bodyguards, or worse, drifted into banditry. Picture a world where your sword is your resume and every job is a potential death sentence. The reality was harsh. The romantic ideal of the wandering swordsman was just that, an ideal far removed from the gritty truth of scraping by day to day. It's the difference between dreaming of being a rock star and playing in a garage band for tips. As the sun climbs higher and the day stretches out before you, the complexities of feudal Japan continue to unfold. The samurai's life, despite its allure and prestige, is fraught with challenges both physical and existential. Meanwhile, merchants and Ronin navigate their own treacherous paths, each with its own trials and tribulations. It's a world of stark contrasts, bound by duty and driven by survival, where every day is a new chapter in a story that's as intricate as a finely woven kimono. So, as you find your place in this historical landscape, remember that the legends and tales only scratch the surface. The real history is far more complicated, a tapestry of honor, hardship, and human nature in all its messy glory. The day is far from over, and there's much more to uncover in this fascinating era. As you soldier on through your samurai day, keep your wits about you and your katana sharp, because in feudal Japan, the only certainty is uncertainty. As you soldier on through your samurai day, keep your wits about you and your katana sharp, because in feudal Japan, the only certainty is uncertainty. Now, as the sun reaches its zenith, it's time to wade into the murky waters of feudal politics, where the stakes are high, and the game is more Byzantine than a soap opera binge watch. Welcome to the world of the Shogunate, where power flows not from an emperor lounging on a golden throne, but from the shogun, a military dictator with a grip tighter than your favorite pair of jeans post-holiday season. The Tokugawa Shogunate, reigning from 1603 to 1868, was the ultimate puppet master, pulling strings from Edo, modern-day Tokyo, and keeping everyone else dancing to its tune. If you think modern politics is a tangled web, try navigating this feudal minefield, where every alliance is a potential betrayal waiting to happen. Here's the deal. The shogun was the big fish in a very large pond, with daimyo, the lords of various domains, swimming around trying not to get swallowed. Think of the daimyo as local warlords, each controlling their own slice of Japan like feudal CEOs. The shogunate kept these power players in check with a clever system known as sankinkarai, a kind of mandatory sleepover party with a sinister twist. Every other year, daimyo were required to leave their domains and live in Edo for extended periods, ensuring their loyalty through a mix of surveillance and sheer inconvenience. Picture a never-ending business trip with no room service. Economically, this was a masterstroke. The constant travel and the need to maintain two households, one in Edo and one back home, drained the daimyo's coffers faster than a Black Friday shopping spree. It was a financial straitjacket that kept them too broke to rebel. But hey, at least they got to enjoy Edo's bustling urban life, a far cry from the rustic charm of their rural estates. But let's not forget the emperor, who, despite being the nominal ruler of Japan, was more of a figurehead than a power player. Residing in Kyoto, the emperor was like that one relative you only see at reunions, important in name, but not really running the show. The shogun wielded the real power, keeping the emperor on a tight leash, and ensuring the imperial court remained a ceremonial sideshow. Now, you might think that Japan was a hermit kingdom, isolated from the rest of the world like the ultimate introvert. Not so fast. While the shogunate did enforce a policy of sakoku, or closed country, this didn't mean they put up a no trespassing sign and called it a day. Instead, they practiced a kind of selective isolation, engaging in limited but strategic international interactions. And to the Dutch, the only Europeans allowed to trade with Japan during this period. Stationed on the small artificial island of Dejima in Nagasaki, the Dutch East India Company was Japan's window to the West. Picture Dejima as the original foreign exchange program, just with more spices and fewer Instagram posts. The Dutch brought with them not only goods, but also ideas, providing Japan with a trickle of Western knowledge, from medicine to technology. It was a cultural exchange that laid the groundwork for Japan's rapid modernization centuries later. But why the Dutch, you ask? Simply put, they played by the shogunate's rules, focusing on business rather than proselytizing. Unlike the Portuguese, whose missionary zeal made the shogunate nervous, the Dutch were all about the bottom line, trading in goods like silk, sugar, and firearms without pushing any religious agenda. It's amazing what you can achieve when you leave your soapbox at home. Let's zoom out and consider the geopolitical chessboard of the time. While Japan was sealing itself off from most of the world, other Asian powers were making their own moves. China was under the rule of the Qing dynasty, a juggernaut of trade and culture. Meanwhile, Korea, under the Joseon dynasty, maintained its own unique cultural identity, while occasionally glancing over at its neighbors with a mix of curiosity and caution. Japan's selective engagement allowed it to absorb what it needed from the outside world without being overwhelmed, like a picky eater at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Back to the domestic front, the shogunate's grip on power relied heavily on a delicate balance of fear and respect. Daimyo who stepped out of line could expect swift retribution. Think less slap on the wrist, more public humiliation or forced suicide. Yet the shogunate also knew when to wield the carrot instead of the stick, rewarding loyalists with promotions and prestigious marriages. It was a constant dance of diplomacy and discipline, where one misstep could cost you everything. So, what does all this political maneuvering mean for you, our intrepid samurai? Well, it's a reminder that your fate is often tied to forces beyond your control. The shogunate's policies dictate your life, from your economic struggles to the very rituals you practice. You're a cog in a vast machine, where loyalty is currency and betrayal is just another Tuesday. As the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows over the landscape, you realize that the world of feudal Japan is as complex as any modern political drama. It's a place where power is wielded with precision, alliances are as fickle as the weather, and every interaction carries the weight of history. The romanticized legends of samurai and shoguns gloss over the gritty reality, but the truth is infinitely more fascinating. So, as you continue your journey through this intricate tapestry, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The day isn't over yet, and there's much more to uncover in this era of contradictions and complexities. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises more twists and turns than a kabuki play. As the evening casts its golden hue, you might think it's time to kick back and relax after a day of navigating the complex web of feudal Japan. But remember, this is a world where downtime isn't spent mindlessly scrolling through social media or binge-watching the latest hit series. No, your entertainment options are more refined, shall we say. Welcome to the sophisticated world of no theater and the tea ceremony, where every gesture has a purpose and every word carries weight. Let's start with no theater, the ancient art form that makes modern drama seem like a reality show. Imagine a stage where actors don masks that are as old as the hills and speak in a language that's as flowery as a Shakespearean sonnet. No is the ultimate slow burn, a performance that combines music, dance, and poetry into a ritualistic spectacle. If you're expecting the high-energy antics of a Broadway musical, think again. No is all about subtlety, with movements so deliberate they make Tai Chi look like a rave. But here's the kicker. No wasn't just entertainment. It was a conduit for moral and philosophical exploration. Each play was a reflection on the human condition, tackling themes like honor, love, and the ever-popular topic of existential dread. It was a chance to lose yourself in stories that were as ancient as they were universal. Yet, while the samurai might appreciate the artistry, the reality was that No was often a tool for political and social commentary. a way to reinforce societal norms, and the all-important Bushido Code. Speaking of societal norms, let's switch gears to the tea ceremony, or chanoyu, which is about as far from your quick morning coffee as you can get. Picture this. You're in a small, serene room where the air is thick with the scent of incense, and the only sound is the gentle clink of ceramic. The tea ceremony is a performance in its own right, a ritualized dance that elevates the humble act of brewing tea into an art form. It's the ultimate exercise in mindfulness, where every action is deliberate and every sip is savored. But don't let the tranquility fool you. The tea ceremony was as much about power and politics as it was about peace and enlightenment. This wasn't just a casual catch-up over a cup of matcha. It was a chance to forge alliances, seal deals, and demonstrate your mastery of etiquette and taste. Imagine using your latte art skills to secure a business deal, except your latte is a meticulously whisked bowl of green tea, and the stakes are significantly higher. So why do these seemingly esoteric arts matter? Because they reflect the intricate social fabric of feudal Japan, a world where cultural pursuits were a means of maintaining social order and reinforcing the hierarchy. In a society where the smallest misstep could lead to ruin, mastering these arts was as crucial as wielding a sword. They were the ultimate status symbols, showcasing not just your taste, but your understanding of the complex dance of social and political maneuvering. As your day winds down, it's time to reflect on the myths and realities of this beguiling era. The romantic image of the samurai, steadfast and noble, is undeniably appealing. Who wouldn't want to imagine themselves as a warrior poet, living by a code of honor and skill? But the reality, as we've seen, is far more complicated. The samurai life was fraught with economic struggles, rigid social structures, and the constant threat of violence. The allure of feudal Japan lies in this tension between romance and reality, the ideal and the actual. Why does this allure persist? Perhaps because it speaks to the human desire for a sense of purpose and belonging. In a world where modern life often feels fragmented and chaotic, the idea of living by a clear set of principles, however harsh, is oddly comforting. The samurai's unwavering commitment to duty and discipline resonates with anyone who's ever longed for a simpler, more straightforward existence, even if that simplicity is largely a myth. As you close the chapter on your day in feudal Japan, consider how history often gets wrapped in layers of nostalgia and legend. We gravitate towards stories of heroism and honor, glossing over the gritty details that don't fit the narrative. Yet it's in these gritty details that the true essence of the past lies. The samurai weren't just noble warriors. They were complex individuals navigating a world as challenging and unpredictable as our own. So, as you drift off to sleep, dreaming of katanas and castles, remember that the past is never as far away as it seems. The stories we tell about history shape our understanding of the present, offering lessons in resilience, adaptability, and the timeless quest for meaning. Feudal Japan may be a world apart, but its echoes can still be heard today, if you listen closely enough. And with that, may your dreams be as rich and layered as the history we've explored together.